And that is why when the finance minister said India is again, as far as concerned, this flying may result in a crash landing. You can fly, but the point is the result of this flying is, as far as concerned, will be.
We have the Union Minister, Mr. Arun Jaitley, addressing some of the questions on the Union presented a couple of hours ago, and along with him will be Union Minister of State for Finance, Mr. Jayant Sinha. And in our studios today, a special panel of interviewers. On my extreme right is Mr. Anil Padmanabhan, and I have got Deepshikha Sekawar also to join us in asking questions on Hindi. Mr. Finance Minister, welcome to the studio. Mr. Sinha, welcome to the studio. To start off, a lot of people are asking this question, and so I will raise them here at the start. What is the central message of your budget? There are many in this budget, as commentators have pointed out. There's infrastructure investment outlay has gone up. Tax administration has been toned up. That's the promise that you have laid out. Subsidies are being reduced, and also even though your revenue assumptions are little moderate, you have improved tax to GDP ratio, even though very marginally. But then there are voices in the Twitter world. There are people saying, is it a middle class budget? Is it an Amartya Sen budget? And also critics are saying that you have your fiscal consolidation plan, and at the same time announced an ambitious increase in central plan outlay in spite of a dismal record in the current year. Could you give us a overview of what your central vision in this budget was in the light of these comments?
First of all, when you compare the present year, this was a year where we inherited the economy. So we got onto a moving train, and the train was moving quite badly. You had to change the entire global attitude towards India. Clear the backlog of decisions, you have to clean up the mess lying on the table. That's what we've done, and that brought positive results. Even though it was not an extraordinary year for the Indian economy, it was a modest year. We are likely to grow under the new series by 7.4%. I think from here, the takeoff comes. Now, I think there are two major factors which we must bear in mind. The first is that the architecture of financial relationship has been redefined. The states were getting 32% plus some extras. Now they get 42 plus 5. So every tax New Delhi collects, 47 goes to the states. So I'm straight away down by 10%. If you look at the all India picture, and we calculated, total national taxes, center and state, the states used to get 49, center still had 51 till last year. This year it is 62 in favor of the states. So the Indian states are financially, I think this is a great development. It's a great development because they are the ones who are going to spend the money on the ground. They are not to be seen just paying salaries and come rushing to Delhi, give me more funds for centrally sponsored schemes or otherwise. Now, how do I make up for the loss of revenue? The size of my cake has shortened. Therefore, next year we have to grow faster. On the projected growth rate of 8% plus, our revenue projection is about 15 to 16%. Last year's projection was overstated because 4.1 was a fiscal target set not by me, but by Mr. Chidambaram, which I had adopted. Halfway through the year, I couldn't change it. And therefore, to run, what is the amount required? Only two ways you can meet the fiscal target. You either earn more or you spend less. Now, we did a little both. But this year is my year. And therefore, I have to be transparent about, now, if my revenues go up by 15.9 or some, as we are projecting with this growth rate, I make up for the short cake by tax buoyancy. The second factor is the other investment destinations barring the United States, are not doing particularly well. Competing economies are under themselves, and therefore the on one engine. They'll need multiple engines. And everybody thinks it's India's chance to fly, if I may use the phrase from The Economist. And therefore there's a positive sentiment about us. Now what do we do in this positive sentiment? Suddenly, expenditure this year, the one fact we have noticed it, despite a positive sentiment, a legitimate comment, on the ground is infrastructure moving. Look at the public-private partnership model is not working. We've got the highways back. Mr. Vajpayee left behind a sector which was going to boom, and we've got a underperforming sector. So everybody is agreeing that you have to pay. Now we've created a new, besides federalism, the second big point. Infrastructure by 70,000 crores. This will have its impact. I am now going to allow projects to carry, to raise money through tax-free bonds. And three, we've earmarked some, I have just announced a contribution, PSUs will also contribute. We start with a 20,000 crore, government or state institutions will contribute. Your capacity to leverage funds, including international funds, is going to be several last month in Delhi, where most of the fund managers, the biggest ones in the world, came and said, let the government put in money, we'll put in our, they can put in about 90% of it. Now in infrastructure. This is the second big idea. The third big idea, when you say is it the Amartya Sen approach? Well, frankly, even though I want the economies to grow, I can't be unconcerned about the poor people. And growing economies must also be concerned with social spending. So I have not, we have not compromised on the social sectors. We maintained the spending. Plus, we had an emphasis on social, your programs, which are social security programs. Now, I would at best say, I don't want to overstate it, we've just started the idea. So between the middle classes and the weaker sections, there's a common thread.
Okay.
The middle classes entirely pay for themselves. So I have allowed them a 50,000 rupee annual deduction. Yes. Put your monies into the pension funds. So you pay less taxes. So by the time you are 60 years old, you'll have a huge, and I'm told the NPS is giving an 11% return today. Right. So the money is going to multiply 7. Even independently, NPS is a safe and a great investment. This money in turn will be used, the more it's spent, the more it's used for a national structure and various other investments. As far as weaker sections are concerned, we've only given, you pay 1 rupee a month, you get an accident insurance of 2 lakhs. You pay less than a rupee a day, 70 paisa a day, you get a life insurance of 2 lakhs. And you pay a nominal amount of rupees a month during your earning life. You get a 5,000 pension, inherited by your spouse, inherited by children. Children will get the coppers.
Yeah.
Now, this is partly the government of India will give a budgetary support. I have said in the pension scheme we'll give an equal support for 5 years. And then I am also cleaning up the amounts which are unclaimed amounts lying in your PPF, which are the unclaimed amounts. And by legislation, they will be transferred for social sector programs for the aged people. Seriously.
Okay.
That's the whole object.
Absolutely. So there are 3 big issues. Anil, would you like to take it further, on especially on the fiscal devolution plan?
Yes, very clearly the shadow of the 14th Finance Commission is all over your budget. So like you rightly said, it is squeezed, the cake has diminished for you. But implicit in it, the 14th Finance Commission said, and what you have said in your budget speech, is a new development ideology for this country in terms of the resource sharing is now based on devolution, not on grants. There is a greater incentive in your budget to create entrepreneurs, to create people who can create their own jobs. So can you just elaborate a little bit on that?
You see, as far as devolution is concerned, I think discretions must end. And therefore, I will give to a particular state because it's a BJP state and somebody else is a Congress state I won't give money to. I think this is a story of the past. Both by the Finance Commission and by my budget, the non-NDA states are greater beneficiaries. Because on some developmental criteria or the need to spend more in them, the Prime Minister has said the eastern part of the country is less resource, is more resource but less affluent. Now we have to walk the talk. Andhra type concession to those areas, etc. The second is consistent with our philosophy of allowing manufacturing, professionalism, all this to grow. Each of our revenue proposals is direction. Now take a small project. Most Indians are the best fund managers. Manage funds and they shift to Singapore immediately and manage funds out of Singapore, because if the individual is in India, the whole fund will be taxed in India. Now, isn't there a need now to rationalize our law as far as that is concerned? The IT sector, technology coming in, isn't it give them some customs rebate? Manufacturing sector, last year I corrected them, inverted duty structure, input costs will go up, therefore we've corrected that aberration. As far as the point which Mr. Bhattacharya made on the middle classes, well, I must say that there is even last year and this year, that these are salaried people who pay income tax. They are the ones who struggle their entire life to save a little money. Do I or do I not put more money in their? It increases spending, compelling them to save. Last year I said I increased by 50,000 rupees the housing loan deduction. I increased 80C savings by 50,000 rupees. Now it was considered time, healthcare for instance. Now people must be as a part of my social security program, people should be incentivized to buy health insurance premiums. Yeah. There must be health insurance policies, so that you can't have a society which in terms of illness, we know how much it costs now to get an unwell person treated. And small concessions like transportation, now it's been 800 ages. Now anybody who uses a vehicle or even uses public transport today, uses the metro in Delhi, can't manage in 800. And therefore to earn, he's spending. So that must be allowed as an expense. Now 800 becoming 1600 is no extraordinary favor with reality.
Mr. Minister, lest our viewers from the non-English speaking states lose out on what has been discussed, Deepshika will be asking some questions in Hindi. Deepshika.
अरुण जी, मोदी सरकार के इस बजट से बहुत आशाएं थी, बहुत अपेक्षाएं थी हर तबके को, चाहे व्यवसाय आम आदमी को ले, किसानों को ले, ये बजट उन सारी अपेक्षाओं पर कितना खरा उतरता है?
देखिए, सरकार का जीवन कार्यकाल 5 वर्ष का होता है और आपको धीरे धीरे अर्थव्यवस्था को पूरा 5 साल में खड़ा करके एक चुनौती पे लाना है। पूरी अर्थव्यवस्था को देखो तो हम अर्थव्यवस्था को दुनिया की सबसे तेज गति से बढ़ने वाली अर्थव्यवस्था बना सकते हैं। तो हम आगे बढ़ें और आगे हम का सपना देखें, और अगर कहीं हम 10-15 साल इस गति से चलते रहे तो देश को गरीबी में से बाहर निकाल पाना संभव होगा। दूसरा, हमें गरीब की भी चिंता करनी थी, उसके लिए पैसा रखना था और राज्यों को भी पैसा देना था। अब ये बैलेंसिंग एक्ट था। हमें इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर भी बनाना था और फिस्कल डेफिसिट की भी चिंता करनी थी। अब ग्रोथ के बीच में और फिस्कल डेफिसिट के अनुशासन के बीच में एक कहीं ना कहीं तो मेल होना चाहिए। तो इसलिए मैं केवल 3% तक की यात्रा 2 साल में तय करूं और इस बार इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर पे आधा खर्च कर दूं, तो उससे तो विकास रुक जाएगा। तो मैंने वो बैलेंसिंग एक्ट किया। कोई बहुत आफत नहीं आने वाली है कि अगर ये 2 साल की बजाय मैं 3 साल में यात्रा पूरी कर लूं, हर साल में 50-50 हजार करोड़ एक्स्ट्रा इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर में अगर डाल पाता हूं तो देश के हाईवेज, देश के पोर्ट्स, देश के इरिगेशन सिंचाई की योजनाएं, देश की रेलवेज, इन सबको लाभ मिलने वाला है। और इसलिए इन सब क्षेत्रों की हम लोगों ने चिंता की है। सो गरीब की, मध्यम वर्ग की और देश का उद्योग तेजी से बढ़े, इस देश में एक खोखली बहस है। मैं हमेशा कहता हूं कि आप गरीब के पक्ष में हो या उद्योग के पक्ष में हो। मैं तो दोनों के पक्ष में हूं। जब तक उद्योग से मैं कमाई नहीं करूंगा तो मैं गरीब की सेवा कहां से करूंगा। इसलिए मैं इसमें अंतर्विरोध नहीं मानता हूं, ये दोनों साथ चल सकते हैं।
आपने बजट भाषण की शुरुआत की थी एक कविता की पंक्तियों से, कुछ तो फूल खिलाए हैं और कुछ और फूल खिलाने हैं, मुश्किल ये है बाग में अब तक कांटे हैं पुराने। तो ये बजट उन कांटों को किस हद तक निकाल पाएगा? बहुत सारी परेशानियां थी उद्योग जगत की, निवेशक भी में हिचकिचा रहे थे। क्या अब ये बजट के बाद
अगर आप पिछले 9 महीने देखें, बिना कोई क्रांति लाए हुए जो देश की टैक्सेशन व्यवस्था थी, निवेशक उसको देखता था और इस देश से दूर भाग जाता था। अब उसको कैसे परिवर्तित करना है, जितने विवाद से धीरे धीरे उन विवादों को सुलाने का काम हम लोग कर रहे हैं, और 9 महीने में हमने किया भी है। कम से कम एक प्रेरणा बनी है कि इस देश की न्याय व्यवस्था है, इस देश की टैक्स उतनी खराब नहीं जितनी हम सोचते थे। अभी भी बहुत सुधार करने की जरूरत है। दूसरा, इस देश में भ्रष्टाचार है। हमने कोल ऑक्शन से 4 तारीख को जो स्पेक्ट्रम ऑक्शन होगी उससे ये साबित सरकार ये अधिकार अपने पास नहीं चाहती। कोई हम पिक एंड चूज करें उसकी आवश्यकता नहीं है। तो मैंने 2 बार बजट भाषण में कहा कि मतलब regimes, corruption and scam regimes are a thing of the past. अब हमने कहा हम कानून लाएंगे कि सारे कॉन्ट्रैक्ट्स किस तरीके से इशू किए जाएंगे। उसमें भी हम अपने पास अधिकार नहीं रखना चाहते, बाजार तय करे एक क्लियर ट्रांसपेरेंट तरीके से। उन विवादों को हल कैसे करेंगे, उसमें फिर सरकार के मिनिस्टर और सरकारी अधिकारी उसमें चौधरी बन जाएं, उसका कोई आवश्यकता नहीं है। उसकी भी एक व्यवस्था उसके अंदर हम बनाएंगे। मैंने यहां तक कहा, मैं का सबसे क्रांतिकारी सुझाव अगर एक आप मुझसे पूछे तो मैं मानता हूं, हम लोगों को निवेश के लिए बुलाते हैं, कहते हैं हमने एफडीआई बढ़ा दी, हमने रेड कारपेट ले डाउन कर दिया। वो जब इस देश में आता है या देश का कोई भीतर का निवेशक है, वो पूंजी लगाता है, फिर 5 साल उसको दफ्तर से दफ्तर भगाते हैं कि तुझे परमिशन कैसे मिलेगी। तो मैंने कहा मैं एक कमेटी बनाऊंगा, उसके आधार पर कानून बनेगा, रेगुलेटरी गाइडलाइंस होंगी, आप अपना काम शुरू कीजिए। अगर गाइडलाइन का उल्लंघन करोगे तो कानून आपको रोकेगा, अन्यथा आपको व्यवसाय करने का अधिकार है। मतलब कम से कम अगर इसमें हम सफल हो पाते हैं तो मैं इसको सबसे बड़ा सुधार उस दृष्टि से मानूंगा।
Mr. Minister, if I can come back to the 14th Finance Commission recommendations and how they impacted your budget, will it be correct to get that impression that this has influenced your tax a little bit? And let me illustrate how it may have influenced your taxation strategy, which is that you have abolished wealth tax, which was a shareable resource, but you have replaced it a 2% extra surcharge, which we will not share. And if you take the figure 1,000 crore in the wealth tax, we are losing 42% of that will be around 420 crore. We have to give to the states, whereas 9,000 crore of 2% surcharge will entirely go to the center. Similarly, if you look at the oil, the petrol and diesel prices, where you are the cess, substituting the increased duties that you had levied during the year with cess, which will again come to you. So taken together, 80,000 crore of annual extra revenue and 9,000 crore surcharge, is getting impacted by the 14th Finance Commission?
I think on the first question of wealth tax, you may not be very accurate. Okay. Because what persuaded my thinking was, why must I have a high cost, low yield tax?
Okay.
Lakhs and lakhs of people are filing returns. They go and understate their jewelry from the jewelers. Real estate people and understate the value of properties. Then they file a return. That returns are now, the whole energy is spent in those lakhs of returns. And finally, we end up getting 900 crores or 1,000 crores from the whole wealth tax, and with all its attendant consequences. So it's a very high cost. low yield.
So why not raise the tax itself?
Therefore, rather than allow that to continue, at some stage after GST, a large number of cesses are going to be subsumed in the taxes. Let's be clear. After all, on service tax, there was a cess which we've subsumed into the as a tax itself. So with GST, it will only be a transient phase. Therefore, I decided that tax on super rich, who can afford to pay it, increase that surcharge by 2%, so that we don't want to favor the rich must pay a little more, and by sacrificing 1,000, saving so much of governmental energy, eliminating corruption and harassment, and I end up collecting 9,000 instead of 1,000.
But states lose out completely.
No, states have gained so much and the idea behind this was not states losing out. When you talk of petrol, there may be partly a point in what you say. My idea was not to make the state suffer. And we realized it when we were raising this. When oil prices come down, how is that money to be shared? 11 times we pass the benefit to the consumer. On one or two occasions, the oil companies have retained the benefit, and they've retained it because they are suffering from inventory losses. You see, they buy at $80 and they are now selling at 60. 1,000 crores was the inventory losses of the oil companies. After all, these are public companies. They can't be made to suffer. The third area is the money coming into the central revenue, either by excise or by tax. Now, manufacturing revenues were low, and therefore we needed to supplement. We have to run a government. But this money, we now intend, a large part of it must go into highways. It's a part of my priority on infrastructure. A little bit goes into railways. So Mr. Suresh Prabhu has shown that he means business. He's not gone in for more trains. He says, let me first put my house. His operating ratio has come down to 88. I hope next time it comes down to 85 or so he has more money for development of the railways rather than just meeting its own expenditure. And this money of the cess will go substantially highways and partly railways. Okay. Now, who owns the highways or the railways? The center of the states is the people of India. These are trust organizations for the people. So if they are to be built out of my budget, nobody should grudge if I am spending money on highways and railways. I am not spending this money on paying salary to my employees.
Fair enough, fair enough. Anil, you have Mr. Sinha, do you have a question on Mr. Sinha?
Yes, actually, I'm curious about the fiscal math underlying the budget. It talks about disinvestment in a big way, particularly strategic disinvestment. FRBM note, it says you're looking at even Suti. So is that true? I mean, you're going to look to divest from the Suti corpus of yours?
Well, if you look at the fiscal math, I think what we have in place are very moderate assumptions. We are thinking that the GDP growth rate is going to be between 8.1 to 8.5%, somewhere in that range. Then, of course, we have to look at nominal GDP when we look at tax collection. So overall, our sense on tax collection, because we think nominal GDP is going to be about 11 to 12%, our overall tax collection number is 14%. Assuming a very slight buoyancy because growth is going to pick up, plus of course we have excise taxes that we have with petrol as well. And as a result of that, we think that the revenue collection number of 14% is quite reasonable. Now, in addition to that, there are non-tax receipts as well. And in the non-tax receipts, there are various categories like dividends from public sector enterprises and so on, but disinvestment indeed is also a major component of that. And our estimation based on the excellent results this year has been that we could get somewhere between, let's say, 65,000 crores on the disinvestment side. So when you add all of that up, I think the fiscal arithmetic adds up quite cleanly.
Actually, just taking it a little further, the strategic disinvestment which you talk of, so you specifically mentioned Suti. This is something which has been discussed by several finance ministers in the past. So are you signaling that you are actually looking to divest? These are UTI holdings, the former UTI holdings. So are you looking to divest?
We have a number of different assets. Suti is certainly one of those assets. There are many other assets as well. Companies that are not listed right now that could be listed. We have companies that are already partially listed that could be disinvested further. This is a decision for the cabinet to take exactly which assets and which sequence and when to do this. Of course, we'll have more time to plan all this out this year because we have the full year to do it.
But in principle, it's on the table.
In principle, anything sensible is always on the table for the government.
Okay.
अरुण जी, मैं भट्टाचार्य जी की उस बात पे दोबारा जाना चाहूंगी कि मिडिल क्लास बजट है, लेकिन मिडिल क्लास की बजट से सबसे बड़ी उम्मीद होती है करों में थोड़ी राहत, थोड़ी छूट। आपने ऐसा नहीं किया है, इसके पीछे क्या कारण था?
देखिए, इस प्रश्न का पहले आप देखिए, इस देश के लोगों में आज 3.5 पौने 4 करोड़ लोग इस देश में टैक्स देते हैं, इनकम टैक्स, और देश की जनसंख्या की तुलना में लगभग 3-4% लोग टैक्स दे रहे हैं। किसी भी देश की टैक्सेशन प्रणाली में इनकम टैक्स की संख्या बढ़नी चाहिए, ये एक चुनौती है, वो घटनी नहीं चाहिए। और इसलिए इस परिभाषा को हम लोग सोचते हैं कि आप केवल स्लैब को बढ़ा दो। स्लैब कभी बढ़ सकते हैं, मैं उसको रूल आउट नहीं करूंगा, लेकिन सरकार के पास फिस्कल स्पेस कितनी है ये भी मुझे ढूंढनी पड़ेगी। और राज्यों को इतने पैसे देने के बाद मेरी जो फिस्कल स्पेस थी बहुत छोटी हो चुकी थी। लेकिन मैंने स्लैब्स न बढ़ाकर लोगों को मजबूर करने की कोशिश की कि वो बचत करें। जो इस देश की बचत 36% होनी चाहिए, वो 29-30% पे आ गई। मुझे उसको वापस 35-36% पे ले जाना है। तो मैं लोगों को एक इंसेंटिव दे रहा हूं कि वो बचत करें, वो बचत करें, अपने भविष्य के लिए करें। तीसरा, उनकी बचत से इस देश का निर्माण होगा, क्योंकि ये सारा पैसा देश के निर्माण में लगेगा। तो इसलिए केवल मैं कि जाइए और खर्च करिए और इसको कंजम्पशन सोसाइटी बना दो। कंजम्पशन सोसाइटी की तुलना में भविष्य के लिए बचत करना और देश के लिए बचत करना, ये मुझे बेहतर ऑप्शन लगी। मैं एक केवल उदाहरण के तौर पर आपको बता दूं, मैंने एक टोटल लगाया है। पिछले साल मैंने 3 तरह की रियायतें दी थी, इस बार भी 3-4 तरह की रियायतें दी हैं। ये दोनों वर्षों की मिला लो तो जो डिडक्शंस हैं या एग्जेम्पशंस हैं वो 2 लाख करोड़ के करीब, 2 लाख रुपए की पड़ती है एक व्यक्ति को। इसके साथ जोड़ ली जाए तो आज टैक्सपेयर चाहे इन सब का लाभ उठाए, तो मैंने अपने भाषण में एक चार्ट भी दिया है साथ में, 4,44,200 करोड़ 200 रुपए, यानी लगभग 4.5 लाख रुपए की डिडक्शन एक व्यक्ति ले सकता है। तो इसलिए 7 लाख 8 लाख कमाने वाला अगर चाहे कि मैं टैक्स ना दूं तो प्लानिंग आदर्श स्थिति में कर सकता है। अब उसके पास इतना पैसा बचेगा बचत के लिए कि नहीं, एक दूसरा प्रश्न है। और ये सारा पैसा उसकी अपनी सेविंग्स होंगी, उसके अपने भविष्य के लिए होंगी, और देश का निर्माण भी इससे हो जाएगा और मेरा सेविंग्स रेट भी बढ़ जाएगा।
घरेलू बचत बढ़ाने के लिए आपने ये योजनाएं आप ये लाए हैं। सोना जो है हमारा, अधिकांशतः हमारी जो बचत है वो सोना खरीदने में जाती है। आपने एक नई योजना निकाली है, इस बजट में बताई है। ये किस तरह से सोना खरीदने की जो आदत है इसको किस तरह से बदल सकती है और हमारा आयात किस तरह से कम कर सकती है?
वेल्थ टैक्स जब था, अगर उसके पक्ष में मुझे बोलना हो तो ये नॉन प्रोडक्टिव एसेट्स कम से कम उभर कर सामने आते थे, हालांकि लोग उसको अंडर एस्टिमेट करते थे। लेकिन एक लगाव है सोने से इस देश का, और अपनी बचत है तो सोने में लगा दी जाए। अब सोने का विकल्प और सोना है तो आप क्या करेंगे? इसमें 3 सुझाव मैंने दिए हैं। पहला ये कि जो सोना है, और इसमें ज्वेलरी आइटम नहीं होंगे, जिनके पास रॉ गोल्ड है, आप जाकर उसको मोनेटाइज कर सकते हैं, बैंक में रख सकते हैं, और आपको नॉमिनल ब्याज भी उसका बैंक से मिल जाएगा। दूसरा ये, आप सोना मत खरीदिए, सोने की कीमत का गोल्ड बॉन्ड खरीद लीजिए जो लोग सेविंग्स में डालते हैं। तो बाजार में सोने का दाम बढ़ेगा, उस बॉन्ड के ऊपर उतनी आपको प्रॉफिट होगी। और तीसरा, इस देश में जिसको हम गिनीज कहते हैं, गोल्ड कॉइन्स, विदेश में बने हुए हमारे देश में चलते हैं, त्योहार पे दिए जाते हैं, लोग गिफ्ट करते हैं, लोग घरों में अपनी सेविंग्स उसमें रखते हैं। तो क्यों सोना देश में इतना आया हुआ है, उसको गोल्ड कॉइन जिस पे अशोक चक्र हो, भारत सरकार का औपचारिक हो, और ये सारे के सारे जो स्मगलिंग या बिना ड्यूटी दिए हुए अधिकतर इसमें से आते हैं, तो इसमें इसको लेजिटिमाइज क्यों ना? हमारा अनुभव पिछली सरकार से भिन्न है पिछली सरकार ने मई के महीने में, ठीक उन्हीं दिनों जब चुनाव के परिणाम आ रहे थे और नई सरकार बदली जा रही, तो उन्होंने एक नई योजना लाए कि इस देश में सोना आएगा, उसको कुछ एक्सपोर्ट हाउसेस लेकर आएंगे, कुछ 6 लोगों के नाम दे दिए। इस देश में भयंकर मात्रा में सोना आना शुरू हो गया, लोग लाते गए, उसको होर्डिंग कर रहे थे। नवंबर के महीने को वापस कर दिया और कहा जिसको सोना चाहिए ले आए। 10% पे सोना गिर गया और दाम कम हो गए, क्योंकि जिन्होंने होर्डिंग की हुई थी उनको अब बाजार में बेचना पड़ा। तो सोने को अगर हम औपचारिक रूप से रोकते हैं तो अनौपचारिक रूप से आता है, ये एक बीमारी है इस देश में। तो इसलिए सोने को आप मोनेटाइज करें, गोल्ड बॉन्ड्स लाएं। आप एक देखिए, हम अर्बन हाउसिंग की बात करते हैं, एक अर्थशास्त्री ने उस दिन सुझाव दिया कि आप रूरल हाउसिंग की सोचिए, और वो बेचारों के पास क्या है बैंक से पैसा लेने के लिए, वो अपना सोना रख के बैंक से पैसा ले सकते हैं। थोड़ा बहुत हर घर में होता है, गांव में भी होता है कई बार। और इसलिए मुझे लगता है ये एक अनप्रोडक्टिव एसेट को प्रोडक्टिव एसेट बनाना, ये योजना हमने बजट के अंदर लाने की कोशिश की है।
Mr. Jaitley, if you turn to your announcements with regard to the corporate sector, you have made a big announcement that you will reduce their corporate from 35% over a period of 4 years, and you also hinted you will be pruning down of the exemptions. Is there a timeline on how you go about it? Because it will create a lot of doubts in their corporate sector's mind, how the exemptions will be tackled. If you can give us some idea on that.
I'll tell you. You see, ideally, I would have loved to do it this year. This was added to my seriousness that I've been in business. To bring corporate tax from 30 to 25. I have to attract investment in this country. Only international, even domestic. Now we have 30% plus surcharges and cess, etc. Look at all the ASEAN countries. They average 21.9. Our competing economies are almost 10% cheaper than us when it comes to the cost of tax. So investors will ask, why in India when I can get a cheaper facility elsewhere? So on competition I lose. My own investors are setting up units in other ASEAN countries because there are low rates of tax. So I need investment to create jobs and to remove poverty. So I lose on 2 counts. First, my high taxing country. Second, on account of these exemptions, what is actually 30%,
That's true. Yeah.
I end up getting only 23% or less. So in an ideal tax structure, you bring the rates down, make them globally competitive, but along with bringing it down, you phase out the exemptions. Now, I don't want to go back on the promise of what exemptions are there. There are some exemptions which have a sunset date.
Yeah.
Those which don't have a sunset date, we can phase them out easily. But I didn't do it this year because I didn't want to take everybody by surprise on one day saying it's going.
But will the exercise of phasing them out happen during the year?
But we will have a program for phasing out. And phasing out, since I've kept a 4-year timetable, the phasing out can be in consonance with the reduction also.
Okay.
So I don't want to profiteer out of this. I want to make India's tax globally competitive, because to attract investment, and at the same time phase out the exemptions which can be phased out. If still something has to raise national interest, that's a different matter. The other advantage of this is going to be the taxman discretion will end. Your tax return will be very simple. And the third advantage is bulk of the litigation of tax is on exemptions. And I think that litigation comes. So we'll have a neater, cleaner, smarter tax system in the country.
Anil, you have
A quick question on the black money part, which is a key part of your budget. So one, I wanted to speak in the context of that you already have a money laundering act and you have a FEMA. Why would you need to come up with a special act to tackle black money? And second follow-up question to that is, how do you prevent this from a kind of misuse in terms of as a victimization of corporates or individuals or what?
You see, first of all, these amendments that the new law that I have announced, it's a law foreign assets. You are an Indian citizen, you keep money in a foreign bank illegally, or you keep an asset outside the country illegally. It only applies to that case. It doesn't apply to either legitimate cases. It's also not a law which applies to domestic black money. We have other laws for domestic black money. Now, for the purposes of Money Laundering Act, the violation of Income Tax Act is not a predicate offence. So if I say that to have a bank account abroad or an asset abroad illegally, it's not a predicate. Needed to put pressure on people as a disincentive. When the law comes out, you will notice that there will be a window under which you make a clean breast, because everybody has to make a disclosure now. Pay the taxes, we'll be charging you a penalty, the percentages will all come out, and thereafter you put an end to your sins. After that window closes, the prosecution chapter begins. Then if we catch anybody with monies abroad, then he is going to be prosecuted. It won't be a compoundable offence. There will be a deterrent punishment. And I think the manner in which, you see, today disclosures are taking place by default. Somebody steals a document and leaks it out. And in each disclosure by default, you see an Indian present somewhere or the other. Which means this is not a hallucination, it's a hard reality. And this reality has to be changed.
How do you prevent misuse? You know, like, because it's a very draconian provision.
Every law can be misused. The Indian Penal Code can also be misused by a thanedar in a police station. That doesn't mean you repeal it. You see, if there is a menace, you'll have to have a strict penalty. Now, if you see the kind of the large number of people being mentioned in all these lists which have been unofficially circulating, it's extremely disturbing. Yeah. Particularly when we are, on one hand, we are easing business in India, we are making taxation reasonable, we are making it, doing everything bending backwards to make sure that people spend their money in India. If still you choose to have it, we are even allowing you to officially carry foreign exchange outside the country and buy a property. Officially you are allowed, but if you want to do it illegally, then you must be prepared for the consequences.
Okay. आपने कहा कि एक ऐसी योजना लेकर आएंगे जिसमें एमनेस्टी, जिसमें लोग आपके
शब्द नहीं कहा,
आपने एमनेस्टी शब्द इस्तेमाल नहीं किया, पर इस तरह की ये जो योजना है उसका प्रारूप क्या होगा?
कानून जब सामने आएगा उसमें स्वाभाविक होगा कि हमारा उद्देश्य ये है कि सारा पैसा वापस आए जो आज बचा हुआ है, क्योंकि जो अकाउंट जिनकी डिटेल्स आई हैं वो तो 2006 की डिटेल थी, तो 2014 तक तो किसी ने प्रतीक्षा नहीं की, सारा पैसा निकल गया था उसमें से। तो इसलिए उसमें हम क्या विंडो देते हैं नहीं देते, ये सारा उसके अंदर स्पष्ट होकर सामने आएगा, वो डिटेल्स उस कानून में होंगी।
और बेनामी कानून की आपने उसे दोबारा लाने की बात की, ये कानून पहले संसद पास कर चुकी है लेकिन अभी तक वो नोटिफाई नहीं किया गया।
देखिए, वो ऑब्सोलीट लॉ है और पिछले वो 1980 के दशक में बना और अगले 25-30 साल तक नोटिफाई ही नहीं हुआ, इसलिए दैट्स अ रस्टेड पीस ऑफ लेजिस्लेशन है, वो अब चल नहीं पाएगा। और इसलिए बेनामी ट्रांजैक्शंस जो आप करते हैं, किसी फर्जी नाम से संपत्ति ले लेना, उसको चेक करने के लिए कि देन यू लूज द एसेट, आपको कानून विशेष लाना पड़ेगा।
I have a question. The finance minister talked about how the direct taxes code is a now thing of the past. So it's a goodbye to direct taxes code, and at the same time announced about how GAR is being postponed by 2 years. Now both these things have actually raised many questions in the sense that what kind of direct taxes regime would it be? Will GAR be postponed yet again? What kind of tax administration mechanism will be in place? So can you throw some fresh light on this?
No, I'll throw some light, and you know, Honorable Finance Minister, I'm sure will have some views on it as well. With respect to the direct tax code, you know, that has been discussed for many years. It was in committee for a number of years as well, and there were a lot of changes that were brought about and suggested even then. But essentially what has happened is that number of those amendments and those modifications made to the tax code as it exists right now, many of the salient and best features of the direct tax code are actually reflected in the tax code right now. And in addition to that, what has happened is that the tax code itself is quite well settled with the case law. Many of the more more complicated issues have now been worked out through either rulings or through the judicial process and so on. So it's actually quite a well-settled body of code now, which you wouldn't want to once again disturb by bringing in a direct tax code. So I say leaving it as it is right now, I think makes a lot of sense, particularly with respect to the corporate tax the regime that we are bringing in place, which will make things even simpler and so on. So I think we should set that aside and leave it as it is right now. Your second question regarding GAR. GAR is an anti-avoidance measure. It is to ensure that people are not using loopholes to avoid tax. And there are a number of interpretations and challenges there in terms of how to implement it, which can also be quite disruptive. So as of now, the best way to consider it is to actually park it, set it aside for a couple of years, and then come back to it and see whether it is still meeting the purposes that it was designed to do, which is to actually...
But is there an interim measure that you can...
No, we've deferred it right now. Let's study it and see whether it will in fact serve the purpose that it's intended to do.
You see, as far as the code is concerned, it had some very good points. A lot of them, point by point, have been incorporated in various budgets. In fact, today, the tax idea of mine, which is partly there in the direct tax code itself. So I won't say it was a bad document, it was a good document. And a number of suggestions of that document have been incorporated. Therefore, the document as a whole now loses its relevance, it will have to be re-examined. As far as GAR is concerned, it's one substantial change in the principles or the rules of taxation. Originally in the taxation rule, evasion was prohibited, avoidance was allowed. Now countries all over the world, developed countries, are now obliterating the line of distinction between evasion and avoidance. So avoidance is as bad as evasion. When those countries have taken it, the international investors have accepted it. Now in India there is a vulnerability, and the vulnerability is at a time when we are wanting to take off, and we think it's our chance now to move ahead. We can't risk investment flowing out. It will have an impact on the rupee-dollar parity, it will have its impact on the monies available on the markets and so on. So we have to be a little more cautious. Secondly, it raises larger issues, particularly because it impacts upon international investment when it gets into India. I can only the wise will be. A man sitting in Los Angeles wants to invest in India. He has to come back via Mauritius, so I give him the relief. But if he wants to fly in directly, I won't give him the relief. So I think there's a lot of, as we proceed further on our fiscal thinking, we'll have to take into, consider all these facts. And therefore, rather than a knee-jerk reaction, I think it's time to pause, think, and therefore we needed time. We have put in abeyance. It's not saying that I find something highly objectionable in GAR. There are countries, developed countries in the world which have accepted these principles. So there is some substance in what the principles are.
I think we have time, one question only. Anil? Go ahead.
Okay, see, I mean, I just wanted to ask a political question at the end of it all, that the two states that have been picked out for special assistance are West Bengal and Bihar. Both are coincidentally poll-bound states. So, I mean...
Can I give you another reason besides the poll-bound? Hasn't the Prime Minister repeatedly said that the eastern part of the country has to grow? They are the ones who need the advantage. We've had a policy that the coal auction money, and hopefully in other case of other minerals to some extent, will go to the states which produce them. So Jharkhand is going to benefit substantially, Orissa is going to benefit substantially. Bihar is landlocked. Bihar is also not mineral rich. It's agriculture rich, but it's not mineral rich. West Bengal has some mineral, but from an industrialized state, industry has gone down. Less than 5% of the total state GDP is industry. The kind of mineral in Jharkhand and Odisha is attracting investment. In Bengal, it's relatively slower. Therefore, these are the two states which need certain incentives. Incentives which we have given to Andhra Pradesh, a 15% investment allowance and a 15% additional depreciation. The same principle will apply if any investment wants to come into Bihar. Now that the FFC has said that no special category status, you have to bring the states up.
I think we have unfortunately run out of time, and we had many more questions, Mr. Minister. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, Mr. Jaitley, Mr. Sinha, for coming to the studios of Lok Sabha television, and wish you all the best. And we come to the end of this session, where the Finance Minister and his deputy, Mr. came and addressed our many questions, and hopefully the questions that our viewers may have come up with while listening to the Finance Minister's budget speech. Thank you.
जी हाँ, तो आप अभी इंटरव्यू देख रहे थे फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर का और डेप्यूटी फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर दोनों का। फिलहाल काफी दिलचस्प इंटरव्यू था जिसमें कि एक पूरा पैनल था जो सवालों की बौछार उनके ऊपर कर रहा था। ये भी देखना होगा कि संसद भवन के बाहर जिस तरह के सवाल आए हैं उसका जवाब किस तरह से दिया है, तो ये भी देखना महत्वपूर्ण है, क्योंकि बहुत सारी चीजें छनकर इस इंटरव्यू के जरिए भी मुंबई से हम एक बार फिर हाजिर हैं, आरएस टीवी की टीम आपके साथ एक बार, और हम कई चीजें देखने की कोशिश करेंगे, डिकोड करने की कोशिश करेंगे कि कॉर्पोरेट सेक्टर के लिए, आम आदमी के लिए और अलग अलग जो समूह हैं जो अपने हिसाब से इस बजट को देख रहे थे, क्या कुछ उनको मिला है और कितनी ऐसी चीजें हैं जिसमें निराशा हाथ लगी है। हालांकि कहा यह जाता है कि बजट को संसद भवन के बाहर समझने में भी कई घंटे का वक्त लगता है, और शायद इसीलिए हम यहाँ पर मौजूद हैं। कुछ खास मेहमानों के जरिए इसको समझने की कोशिश करेंगे कि किसको क्या कुछ हासिल हुआ है, और खासकर देश की जो अर्थव्यवस्था है उसके लिए किस तरह का रोड मैप इसमें नजर आ रहा है, संकेत किस तरह के हैं। मेरे साथी गोविंद भी मौजूद है।
Thank you, Arva. So let's begin. I think what is first, what was the message, or what is the one directional message that we are taking away, and then we'll get down to some of the more specifics, individual corporate tax and so on and so forth. Shailesh?
The message is that you should be proud to be an Indian.
Okay.
In a country which has the second best performing capital market in the world, the highest growth rate in the world, inflation at a moderate level of 5%, a propensity to grow at a rate which will be double digit in no more than 2 years.
And so you're saying that the preconditions for all of this is already there?
Already
in
there.
The
There were
budget.
great macros, there was great good feeling amongst people. It's an inspiring and inspired budget, is how I would like to
Let me
put
get
it.
some more. Prabhat?
I think he has laid down all the points on a platter which will actually skyrocket this economy if we can execute and implement it properly to a double-digit growth rate that we are all expecting.
Give me one or two instances you felt are good instances which you can,
I think going to the corporates and other things, I think the first thing that he has done extremely well is to handle the fiscal deficit. The fiscal deficit target, which he has actually taken a little extra time, and which is following 4.1% to 3.9% to 3.5% and to 3%, is very, very acceptable budget. And he is already doing very well on the divestment side of it, and I think that will be absolutely achievable. And with the amendment of the FRBM Act, we will be under the right level. That is number one.
Yeah.
And number two is that his emphasis on infrastructure is absolutely most commendable. The way he has 2 lakh crore on spending of infrastructure over a period of that is the only thing that is lacking in our economy, and that 2 lakh crore spending, if properly done, whether it's private or public or overseas money, that is something which has to lay down the growth rate of this economy for the next 5 to 7
years. So I'm going to come to second with Prakash. Debopam, what are the macro signals you picked up from this?
So in my opinion, this was an honest and ordinary budget. Thankfully, there was no populist measures, and thankfully it didn't have any big bang reforms as was being anticipated earlier. So the macroeconomy is definitely on a sound path now. That is something what Mr. Arun Jaitley also acknowledged at the beginning of the budget, and the economic survey did paint yesterday. So I feel the fiscal deficit targets that has been given, very honestly, he had asked for one additional year in order to meet the fiscal deficit targets, which was really transparent on his side, is pretty attainable. The economy can definitely attain a double-digit growth rate over the next 3 years, given the type of we are already seeing on the streets. Sentiment is high, and it is common knowledge management is the first mover to a macro recovery.
Right. So if we were to ask that question, investment and jobs, you're saying that the growth part is taken care of by this budget, or at least what we heard today.
Prospects of a definite growth has been taken care of because we are already in a recovery phase. And Indian government are always criticized that whenever the economy is or starts or embarks on a recovery phase, cutting down expenditures in order to cut down fiscal deficits and all that. So what happens is the path to growth becomes elongated.
Right.
This time, Arun sound that he is not really much bothered about the fiscal deficit. He is okay to let the fiscal deficit target to slip from 3.6 to 3.9 or the revenue deficit 2.6 to 2.8, but he is more focused on...
And more importantly, from what I hear, is that you're saying that the government seems to be in control.
Government seems very much in control by investing in sectors which has a high multiplier effect.
Okay, Ved, how do you see it? A lot of things for the financial services sector as a whole.
So I think that this budget reflects the political mandate of the government, and the fact that if you just go back and think about the political mandate is that we don't want freebies. We want to be empowered. We want to be empowered to find jobs. We want to be empowered to learn, skill ourselves, and so on and so forth. Broadly, if you look at the budget, there's accident insurance, there's financial inclusion, like you mentioned, etc. So the level of insecurity that individuals has comes down. You are insured. You have some amount of access to financial, and there's enormous amount of investment into skill development and Make in India. So what I'm saying is that give me a job, I'll skill myself, make me secure, and I'll make my own path.
And yet the markets have not reacted very favorably. I mean, of course, they're going wildly up and down during the session, but after that they seem to have reacted negatively.
So I think, in a lighter vein, the challenge that is there with the finance minister and the markets is a bit like the Indian cricket team, right? That there's so much of expectation before you go into a one-day match that it is very difficult.
आपने जिक्र किया कि inclusivity की बात की गई, inclusive growth इसका ये सरकार जिस प्लान पे आई है वापस, उसमें ये भी है कि जो एक जॉब क्रिएशन की बात है, बल्कि जॉब रिवोल्यूशन की बात हो रही है कि नौकरियां बढ़ाई जाएंगी। बजट में ऐसे कौन से पॉइंट्स हैं जिसमें आपको ये लगता है कि वो रिवोल्यूशन हो पाएगा जिसका जिक्र पीएम मोदी करते रहे हैं?
तो मेरे ख्याल से मैं 4 चीजों का जिक्र करना चाहूंगा। एक तो जो उन्होंने JAM बोला है, जैम बोला है कि जन धन, आधार और मोबाइल, इन सब का मिला जुला असर होगा, और इसको आप अगर DBT के साथ देखें तो इसका असर ये होगा कि एक बड़ी जो संख्या में हमारी जो जनता है वो फाइनेंशियल क्षेत्र में आएगी, उनको सिक्योरिटी मिलेगी क्योंकि इंश्योरेंस मिलेगा, वो हमारी सरकार के साथ आएंगे। और साथ में ही उन्होंने प्लग एंड प्ले की बात करी है, उन्होंने जैसा कि बात हुई पहले इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर इन्वेस्टमेंट की बात करी है, तो इस सबका मिला जुला असर ये होगा कि इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर और इसके साथ ही कॉर्पोरेट सेक्टर जो है वो डेवलप होगा, जॉब्स क्रिएट होंगे, और जो एम्पावर्ड लोग हैं वो खुद को स्किल कर पाएंगे और इन जॉब्स के लिए अपने आप को प्रस्तुत कर पाएंगे।
प्रफुल्ल बनर्जी, बात ये हो रही है कि किस तरह से ये सरकार बार बार मुकाबला जाहिर होता ही रहेगा कि यूपीए ने क्या किया और एनडीए अब क्या करना चाहता है। बहुत पुरानी भी नहीं हुई है अभी सरकार। अगर हम जैम का भी जिक्र करें तो उसमें भी जो तीनों स्कीमों का हम जिक्र कर रहे हैं, JA और M, बहुत कुछ ये भी यूपीए मॉडल पर ही है। तो ऐसा क्या है जो यूपीए में काम नहीं किया और इस जैम से हमें इतनी उम्मीद हो रही है? ये ट्रिनिटी जो है तीन वाक्यों की।
मेरा ख्याल ये है जी, I think all the government try their best. I am not here to compare the governments, but best part would be that this government, whatever they are doing to execute, they will have to be given more time. It is only 9 months that they have come in power. We have given other governments 10 years, if not 60 years. And I think we need to give this government much more than what we have given today and see how they perform. And implementation of all these schemes that they talked about is the main key thing for taking us to that growth path, and I think it will be done very well.
प्रबल, अभी वित्त मंत्री ने ये भी कहा कि ये बड़ी खोखली सी एक डिबेट है कि कहा जाता है या तो आप कॉर्पोरेट की तरफ हैं या आप गरीबों की तरफ हैं। क्या आप ये मानते हैं कि वाकई ये ऐसी डिबेट है जहां आपको एक तरफ खड़े होना है, सरकार को खासकर?
मेरा ख्याल ये है जी, ये कॉर्पोरेट के लिए नहीं है, दिस इज एक्चुअली फॉर all the people who are involved with the growth of the economy. And let me explain what I am trying to say. If you look at the whole spectrum, there was one issue of federal government was always facing this government, central government. He has actually gone and given 62% of the central government's resources being distributed to the state government. That itself will actually ensure that resources at central government will actually reach the state government, and from the state government we expect that it will reach the poor and common level of the people. If you look at the all other steps that he has taken, he has talked about the students, he has talked about the disabled, he has talked about the women, he has talked about the senior most people and have provided for everything.
लेकिन ये
I think-
सेगमेंट्स हमेशा ही होते हैं बजट में.
No, होता है, but आप ये देखिए that what he is trying to do, that's why I'm actually emphasizing on execution, that if he can execute all these points that he has made, we will be a different economy 5 years down the
लेकिन आप
line.
इसमें इफ लगाना चाहते हैं, यानी कि हम कहने की कोशिश में ये कर रही हूँ कि जो एग्जीक्यूशन का आप क्या आप ये कह रहे हैं कि ब्यूरोक्रेसी कुछ अलग तरीके से काम करेगी इस सरकार में?
I won't say that. You are asking me a little loaded question. I would like to address it like this. I would say the execution is always a challenging thing in any sphere
और
of
आप
the
उम्मीद
world.
कर रहे हैं कि एग्जीक्यूशन
हम उम्मीद
अच्छा
कर रहा है
होगा?
कि execution होगा because in a number of cases, not only in India, globally, we actually fail on our mission because the policies, theories, strategies are all good, but we don't implement and execute it
So,
that
Prabal,
well.
what about corporate tax? I mean, you're the big corporate in this group here. How do you see that, the reduction from 30 to 25%?
I see that that's a right step, but I do not see that actually being the incentive to go ahead and invest a lot more
Do you see
money.
taxes actually going up because if to go and things could get balanced
This
out?
depends. If the exemption go, and particularly you need to analyze it after seeing the fine print. There's a very valid question. If the exemptions go away in relation to the investments, then it will can have a negative impact. The exemption can go where the company is making tremendous amount of profit and is also
Right.
enjoying. In that case, exemption can go. But if it is, these exemptions are related to investment, then it will be counterproductive.
Shailesh bhai, how do you see that? No, I mean, the finance minister did juxtapose this, right? He talked about
No,
a
it's very
surcharge
clear.
on personal tax and
The important point he made is that the effective tax rate is 23%. So he was not promising a reduction. There was overjoy when 30 was thought to be brought down to. But what he said is that we want to eliminate all the distractions from the tax code and over a period of 4 years bring down the rate to 25%. Next year, actually the tax rate will go up because the 30% rate stays and the surcharge will kick in to raise the tax outflow. Even when it touches 25 after 4 years, if the effective tax rate today is 23 and the effective tax rate then becomes 25, that's actually a larger collection.
Okay, so let me ask you the other quick tax question, which is really to do with the surcharge, right? So removal of wealth tax on one hand and imposition of 2% additional surcharge on high net worth individuals. The arguments, 1,000 crore, give up 9,000 crore.
I thought it was a superbly done thing. It speaks to the promise of simplicity, predictability, stability in tax laws. This wealth tax was an anachronism. To collect 1,008 crores and have a whole tax machinery dedicated to it was absurd. And
शैलेश, आप जो है इस बजट से काफी प्रभावित नजर आ रहे हैं. चारों पैनलिस्ट में आप ज्यादा इम्प्रेस्ड हैं. ये बताइए फिलहाल कि बार बार जो हमने सुना है ईज ऑफ डूइंग बिजनेस की बात करते रहे पीएम मोदी, आज अरुण जेटली साहब भी इस बात को कह रहे थे. ऐसी कौन सी चीजें आपको नजर आई हैं इस बजट में, खासकर अगर इम्प्लीमेंटेशन फ्यूचर के लिए भी रख दें तब भी, कि जिससे ईज ऑफ डूइंग बिजनेस जो है वो बेहतर हो जाएगा? क्योंकि पिछले दिनों में जो रिकॉर्ड हमारे सामने आया है उससे भारत और नीचे गिरा है इस स्थान में.
मैं ये समझता हूं कि ईज ऑफ डूइंग बिजनेस आएगी. क्यों? उन्होंने कहा अपनी बजट स्पीच में कि उन्होंने एक ई बिज प्लेटफॉर्म बना दिया है जिस 14 तरह की जो परमिशंस लगती है एक बिजनेस को चालू करने में, उन सबको एकत्रित करके एक ही परमिशन मिल जाएगी इंस्टेंटली. इससे ज्यादा ईज ऑफ बिजनेस क्या हो सकती है? दूसरी बात कि जो भी पेमेंट्स हैं अपनी इकोनॉमी में, वो सब कैश नहीं, डायरेक्ट ट्रांसफर बैंक की पेमेंट सिस्टम से होने लगेगी. डिस्प्यूट रेजोल्यूशन के लिए बहुत उन्होंने बोला है. तो ये सब मिल मिला के ईज ऑफ बिजनेस होगा.
We also talked about disincentivizing cash and state and debit card payments, which is also significant.
One more point towards Shailesh made a very valid point. The other additional point that the finance minister said very clearly is that while 14 approvals and everything can be converted into one, but the business can start pending that approval, and that approval can be done post facto. That is the major important step in that will help us doing in
Creating
own
the
business.
enabling frame.
लेकिन दीपक जी बताइए एक्विजिशन को लेकर जिस तरह की बहस है, जब ईज ऑफ डूइंग बिजनेस की हम बात करें तो सबसे पहले जमीन लेना ही कितना मुश्किल है भारत में। फिलहाल ये जो ऑर्डिनेंस है उसको एक्ट बनाने के लिए कितनी सरकार को मुश्किलें झेलनी पड़ रही हैं, आपको इस बात का अंदाजा है? क्या बिना लैंड एक्विजिशन की मुश्किल को हल किए ईज ऑफ डूइंग बिजनेस को पार किया जा सकता है?
बिल्कुल नहीं, लैंड एक्विजिशन एक इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट रह जाता है, लेकिन ईज ऑफ मेकिंग बिजनेस और डूइंग बिजनेस अकेला एक सेंटर का टॉपिक नहीं है। इट इज द सब्जेक्ट ऑफ द स्टेट्स ऑल्सो। सो फॉर एग्जाम्पल, जैसे देवेंद्र फडणवीस की सरकार आई थी महाराष्ट्र में, द फर्स्ट थिंग दे डिड वाज दे रिड्यूस द नंबर ऑफ लाइसेंसेस रिक्वायर्ड टू सेट अप अ न्यू फैक्ट्री फ्रॉम 75 to 22. सो ऐसे प्रोएक्टिव अगर स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स भी होने लगे तो एट ओवरऑल बेसिस और एट द पैन इंडिया लेवल डेफिनेटली ईज ऑफ डूइंग बिजनेस विल बिकम मच बेटर।
लेकिन विपुल, इसमें जो राजनीतिक मजबूरी है वो ये भी है कि अगर बहुत ज्यादा आसान हो जाता है तो शायद ये भी मुश्किल की बात है कि जो चेक एंड बैलेंसेस होने चाहिए, चाहे वो घरेलू इन्वेस्टर्स की बात हो, घरेलू कंपनियों की बात करें या विदेशी कंपनियों की बात करें, तो शायद सरकार को वो अपना एक जो वक्त लेना चाहिए बराबर प्रॉपर चेक एंड बैलेंसेस के लिए, वो तो मिलना ही चाहिए।
जी, अब अभी महाराष्ट्र का एग्जांपल आप ले लीजिए। महाराष्ट्र में सफिशिएंट चेक्स एंड बैलेंसेस हैं। द स्टेट इज थ्राइविंग, इट इज वन ऑफ द टॉप 3 स्टेट्स इन द कंट्री, and despite and even then we have a very easy licensing policy in Maharashtra compared to something like a West Bengal or maybe a Madhya Pradesh or Uttar Pradesh. तो अगर
आप ये कह रहे हैं कि इनएफिशिएंसी को इससे न तोला जाए कि शायद सरकार जो है बहुत जस्टिफाइड होने की कोशिश कर रही है या एक न्यायपूर्ण सरकार बनने की कोशिश कर रही है। इनएफिशिएंसी अलग चीज है और जस्ट सरकार होना अलग चीज है।
एक और प्रोविजन आ रहा है जिससे ये जो आप वो बिल्कुल निकल जाएगा कि टू स्टार्टिंग द बिजनेस एक फ्रेमवर्क बनाया जाएगा कि अगर आप उस फ्रेमवर्क के तहत बिजनेस करना चाहते हैं तो आपको परमिशन से क्या होता है कि आप फ्रेमवर्क में बैठ जाएं। अगर फ्रेमवर्क ही साफ और क्लियर हो तो फिर आपको परमिशन की जरूरत नहीं।
शैलेश जी, कहीं ना कहीं देखिए, कॉर्पोरेट इंडिया को जाहिर है फेवर करना चाहती है सरकार, लेकिन उसके बावजूद भी उनसे एक दूरी बना के रखना भी सरकार की मजबूरी है।
कॉमन हैंड से बात कर रहे हैं। मैं समझता हूं कि जो कॉमन मैन के लिए इस बजट में प्रोविजंस है वो मैंने पहले किसी भी बजट में नहीं देखा। डायरेक्टली पैसा लोगों के हाथ में पहुंचेगा, डायरेक्टली लोगों को ये मैसेज दिया जा रहा है कि आप अपनी दूर की सोचिए। जब आप कमाते नहीं होंगे तब क्या होगा। पेंशन पे जो 1 लाख रुपया बढ़ावा किया है ईपीएफओ और एनपीएस में, वो एक गेम चेंजिंग आइडिया है, क्योंकि इंडिया में सबसे पुअर क्वालिटी ऑफ पेंशन कवरेज है पूरी दुनिया में। जो बड़ी इकोनॉमीज हैं उनमें सब में हम देख लें।
अब बिहार और बंगाल का हम जिक्र कर रहे हैं, थोड़ी सी राजनीति में ले आते हैं इस बहस में कि बिहार और बंगाल पे इतना प्यार क्यों आया है इस बार?
No, I think I would not try and find out any political motive in this. I think there is no doubt that Bihar and Bengal today is part of the, all said and done, is a downtrodden part of the states, and we need some incentive over there. And I think they are trying to do that very rightly so that.
लेकिन चुनाव भी जल्दी होने वाले हैं दोनों
so that is incidental. Question is that please understand, Chunav is with the common people, and if you look at that budget, the people, common people, they will perceive in this budget that there is nothing in this budget for the common people. Please understand this. Why? Because what is our expectation of common people in the budget? That there will be relaxation on salary taxation, there will be concessions on home rate and repayment further, and there will be relaxation on auto loan. Nothing is there over here. And so that is why you will find that there is, the market has actually given a negative trend of just after the budget was completed. One portion is that obviously we have not read the fine print as of today, it is yet to come. But the question is that people actually will misconstrue this budget, not catering to those preconceived demands or notions or expectations of the common people.
Right.
But the long-term effect of this budget is much wider and much more positive.
Okay, wait, a couple of points now, just to return to the financial part of the world. One is the gold bonds. I mean, you know, you can sort of, the whole objective of monetizing or the attempt to move people away from physical gold to, you know, more virtual gold, so to speak.
Correct.
Do you see that solving this fundamental problem, right? Because finally, to achieve these larger targets of investment and growth, we need more savings coming into the markets. Is gold going to do that? And broadly, are you seeing other sort of signals from this budget which you think will revitalize the whole savings economy?
So I think specifically in the area of financial services, there are 3 or 4 things that have been done. One is, like you mentioned, monetization of gold. I think it's a step, and I think we have to wait and watch. Indians love gold, Indians love physical gold, and so we really have to see how much of that gets monetized. I think, but there are a couple of other areas we speak about. The pass-through status that REITs have been given. I think housing and ownership of real estate is another one big area where savings are at the moment locked in. So I think that is something that can become very, very exciting. The infrastructure fund that they've spoken about and the sovereign support to risk, if you look at it, composite whole for infra is an important idea. And some of the other stuff that they have done, for example, making permanent establishment structure more transparent, ensuring that everything is
On
done.
infrastructure fund specifically, do you feel that was really the problem, as in we've also announced infrastructure funds in the past, haven't we?
I think, but there has been some specific allocation and so on and so forth. So, the point was made about execution. So the hope is and the expectation is that there would be far more focus on execution, getting it off the ground and moving. And I think in this budget, there has been a lot more talk about we are going to be enablers. Come forward and take the benefit of this enabling environment that we are creating. So I'm sure even in this infrastructure fund, maybe there will be a lot more participation of multilateral sort of multifarious institutions.
शायद ये बात भी कही गई कि जॉब सीकर के बजाय जॉब क्रिएटर बना जाएगा। तो ये सुनने में तो अच्छा लग रहा है, लेकिन किस तरह से जॉब सीकर जॉब क्रिएटर बनेगा?
जैसे मैंने कि पहले भी कहा कि
I just add to that, the number of times the finance minister used the word startups, I've not heard any finance minister or budget use that. I mean, it's such a new generation word.
तो मैं वही, जैसे कि मैंने पहले भी कहा, एम्पावरमेंट थीम है कि भाई हम एम्पावर करना चाहते हैं। एक जैसा कि पहले बात की गई है कि स्टेट्स को ज़्यादा डेवलपमेंट हुआ है, वेंचर कैपिटल फंड्स चालू करने की बात हो रही है, माइक्रो फाइनेंस को सपोर्ट करने की बात हो रही है। तो अब आप एक साधारण मानस के आप अपने उनको इशूज में रखें तो मुझे सिक्योरिटी दी जा रही है, मेरे पास बैंक अकाउंट है, मुझे इंश्योरेंस दे दिया गया है, मुझे स्किल डेवलपमेंट का फोकस है, मैं अपने आप को स्किल कर पा रहा हूँ, मुझे फाइनेंस सपोर्ट है, माइक्रो फाइनेंस सपोर्ट है कि मैं छोटे छोटे बिजनेस चालू कर सकता हूँ और साथ में ही प्लग एंड प्ले है कि मुझे गवर्नमेंट की परमिशन ज्यादा नहीं लेनी पड़ेगी। तो मेरे ख्याल से इसका एक मिला जुला असर ये होगा कि जो एक साधारण आदमी है वो अपने बिजनेस चालू करने के बारे में सोच सकता है। एक हमने बात नहीं करी है स्किल डेवलपमेंट की, काफी फोकस रहा है बजट में स्किल डेवलपमेंट।
He's talked about integrating the sort of all the ministerial approaches as well.
Skill development.
The biggest thing there in that particular topic is the fact that the world has stopped creating jobs. There's no way that anybody going forward of creating jobs. The only way you can do it is to create entrepreneurs or to create self-empowered
पिछले
people.
साल तक भी हम सुनते हैं कि ग्रोथ तो है लेकिन जॉबलेस ग्रोथ हो रही है, कि ग्रोथ तो नजर आ रही है।
हमारा पिछले 10 साल में जो ग्रोथ हुआ है जॉबलेस ग्रोथ हुआ।
देखो इसके अलावा जो हाउसिंग फॉर ऑल की बात है, हाउसिंग फॉर ऑल एंड स्पेशली उसको भी अफोर्डेबल बनाने की बात है। ये भी कहा पीएम मोदी ने कि 2022 तक जो है हिंदुस्तान में स्लम्स ही खत्म हो जाएंगे। हम जिस शहर में बैठे हुए हैं वहां तो एशिया का सबसे बड़ा स्लम जो है उसको रोमांटिसाइज भी हालांकि बहुत बार किया गया है। ये बताइए कि इस बजट में आपको ऐसी कौन सी चीजें नजर आई हैं जिसमें पहली बात तो हाउसिंग फॉर ऑल, ये एक बुनियादी बात, दूसरे अफोर्डेबल हाउसिंग फॉर ऑल, और कितना प्रैक्टिकल ये नजर आ रहा है 2022 के आपको बहुत अचीवेबल लगता है?
एज फार एज द स्पीच इज कंसर्न्ड ऐसा कुछ था नहीं जिससे हम लोग बोल सके कि हाउसिंग फॉर ऑल इज अचीवेबल। फाइन प्रिंट पर आना बाकी है, पढ़ना बाकी है, लेकिन जो पिछला बजट था और द वेरियस स्टेटमेंट्स दैट मिस्टर मोदी हैज बीन मेकिंग, the government seems to be committed towards creating affordable housing by in a way of increasing FDI in affordable housing space and all of that. And the second very big impact to affordable housing, or in fact buying houses by middle class, would be a decline in interest rates. So I think today's budget paves the way for Raghuram Rajan to in a way start cutting down interest rates, assuming that the government will take ownership of the supply issues which is contributing to inflation today.
अवैतिका जी आप इसमें कुछ ऐड करना चाहेंगे, कैसे हाउसिंग फॉर ऑल बनेगा?
I'm not too sure on the interest rate side. I would like to disagree. I'm not too sure how this budget actually contributes. You have a higher fiscal deficit than was possibly, you have higher duties which would possibly stoke, though inflation is coming down. And I think the government borrowing, nobody has spoken about that, but if you look at the figures and if you add up the numbers, the government borrowing goes up significantly compared to the previous years. So I think if you add up all this, I'm not too sure if the budget really supports significantly. The budget
the economic survey already talked about, the budget creating the preconditions for an interest rate cut.
जी दूसरी बात है बिजली को लेकर, इलेक्ट्रिसिटी, इसके दो पार्ट्स हो सकते हैं। एक पार्ट जो आप देखना चाहते हैं, दूसरा जो मैं पूछना चाहती हूँ कि एक तो वो कंपनियां जो कि पावर सेक्टर की कंपनियां हैं, पावर एंड एनर्जी, उनके लिए किस तरह की खबर इस बजट में है? उसके बाद मैं आऊंगी कि आम लोगों, जो रिसीविंग एंड पे है, जो आम लोग हैं, उनके लिए बिजली के क्या प्रोविजन है। पहले कंपनियों का जिक्र करते हैं।
You see, as of today in this, we think the land acquisition bill and all other steps that the government is taking, which may not be strictly part of this budget, that is helping the corporates for generating more power. Apart from the fact the government has themselves said that they will actually fix up and generate projects of 5 UMPP projects of 4,000 megawatt each. So I think that will increase the supply or the availability of power to the people in general. So although there is no direct help to those power generating companies prominently in the fine print that I can see.
और इसको इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर के हिस्से के तौर
But
पर
it
देख
is
सकते
part
हैं।
of, obviously, power is part of, very much part of the infrastructure. And after spending substantial amount of time in the infrastructure industry, I think this budget gives a lot of fillip to the infrastructure as a whole by committing money.
But do you see, I mean, are you sort of going by experience again, any concerns on that front? I mean, UMPP as a concept again is not new, and the whole approach of the government trying to kind of kickstart a power project in the past has been met with failure for various reasons. What could be the lessons perhaps then?
कुडानकुलम को लेके भी अनाउंसमेंट हुआ है कि दूसरे फेज में एंटर होगा।
खत्म हो जाएगा।
I will tell you, I personally feel, allow me to go back to the same point of execution which we Indians as a whole could not do it last time. I think we have taken lessons from our experience so far, and this time we will be very careful about what price we quote in the UMPP, which should be reasonable.
Very good. That's the point I wanted.
The moment you make that, why did the UMPPs and all other power producers really fail?
Exactly.
Because they were absolutely unreasonable and after unrealistic price quotation in the previous UMPPs and power projects.
Correct.
And in fact, they wanted to grow big without looking at the profitability of this. I think the government should overhaul the entire power scenario by saying to the consumers as well as the producers, look here gentlemen, while we are here to supply you power, but you need to at least cover the cost of power and the minimum amount of profit on the investment that the procurers, that the producers make. So the power manufacturer, power supplier has to be rewarded for the risk that they are taking, and the pricing has to get in each and every power supply to the common people. That is what.
महत्वपूर्ण बात यह है कि जो आम आदमी है भारत का, ऐसे भी बहुत सारे गांव हैं जहां अभी तक बिजली नहीं पहुंची, जिन्होंने आजाद भारत में अभी तक बिजली बल्ब उनके घर में जलता हुआ नहीं देखा है। इस सरकार में आपको ऐसी कौन सी इंटेंशन किस तरह से नजर आती है? खासकर बजट में पहला फुल फ्लेजेड बजट था जो कि एक पॉलिटिकल डॉक्यूमेंट भी है, सरकार का इंटेंशन भी पता चलता है कि वो क्या करना चाहती है। तीनों जो जरिए है हमारे पास बिजली उत्पादन के, चाहे वो न्यूक्लियर का हम जिक्र करें, सोलर का हम जिक्र करें, या फिर हम कोल की हम बात करें, क्या इसमें प्रायोरिटी सरकार की क्या नजर आती है?
तीनों में बात छेड़ी है फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर ने। ग्रिडलेस सोलर पावर की बात की गई है कि जहां जो हमारे विलेजेस जो ग्रिड से जुड़े नहीं हैं उनको कैसे पावर पहुंचाया जाए। तो वो ग्रिडलेस सोलर पावर, रूफटॉप सोलर पावर, स्मॉल पावर, स्मॉल हाइड्रो, इन सब की बात हुई है। कोल पे हमारे यहां कोल की क्षमता इतनी ज्यादा है और हम कुछ भी कर लें, पूरी दुनिया कुछ भी कर ले, 70% of power supply will have to come from coal.
लेकिन एनवायरनमेंट का भी बहुत बड़ा खतरा है।
इसलिए उन्होंने जोर दिया है कि वो क्लीन कोल कैसे किया जाए, उस पे इन्वेस्टमेंट जाए।
क्योंकि इंटरनेशनल मंच पे जाके हम कुछ कहकर आते हैं, फिर यहाँ आके फिर कोयले से बिजली बनाते हैं।
भारत को एक आधुनिक भारत बनाने की चर्चा बराबर की जाती रही है, लेकिन भारत को एक आधुनिक भारत बनाने की दिशा में गरीबी और बेरोजगारी से छुटकारा दिलाने की दिशा में जो प्रभावी कदम उठाए जाने चाहिए थे, इसके पहले कभी नहीं हुआ। और मैं कह सकता हूं कि यह बजट जो आज प्रस्तुत हुआ है यहाँ पर, उसकी जितनी भी सराहना की जाए वह कम है और आधुनिक भारत के निर्माण में एक यह बहुत ही सकारात्मक और सार्थक पहल है।
मैं मोदी सरकार पहले पूर्ण बजट को रोजगार लक्षी मानता हूं और गरीबों को सुरक्षा प्रदान करने वाला ये बजट है। इसलिए मैं वित्त मंत्री श्रीमान अरुण जेटली और देश के प्रधानमंत्री श्री नरेंद्र मोदी जी को बधाई देता हूं।
And it will accelerate the growth, and it will at the end will bring all-round development. Very innovative, very inspiring, and people will be very happy not only about the budget proposals but also the reforms in taxation and also the steps that are going to be taken to end the black money and taking care of the vulnerable sections, uplifting the poorest of the poor. These are the highlights of this budget.
Right, sorry, we were talking about black money and we lost the connection. So, okay, so, you know, the finance minister spent a lot of time talking about black money. He outlined the efforts that the government had been putting in so far, and there's been a lot of run-up into this as well. He also talked about black money in the domestic front, which in some ways is more critical because it needs... So there's almost a package to deal with black money with severe and fairly stringent punishments and penalties. How do you read this?
I read it as follows. My end game is that people will be extraordinarily scared to generate and keep black assets or black.
Even within the country.
The incentive to indulge in creating black money has been significantly reduced. There is no cost that people will be willing to pay if they go to jail for 10 years or 3 times the property will be paid out in terms of taxes or that they will be prosecuted. Now the provisions are so strict that I think the complete incentive to even cheat one bit has been eliminated. See the bill, I would like to see how it gets implemented. I don't want it to become a draconian tax terrorism means, but I do see that if people read the fine print and take lessons from it, we will eliminate.
कहा जा रहा है कि शायद बहुत प्रैक्टिकल नहीं है ये बात जिस तरह से उन्होंने प्रोसिक्यूट करने की बात की है.
My view on this is very clear. I am overly enthused with this black money bill, and I will explain why. The thing is that this government, a lot of people, as you very rightly said, this government have been booed by a lot of people saying that what is happening on black money. To understand this, we need to understand the black money that has been accumulated over the last 60 years from 1947 till or before this government came in. It cannot be corrected within the 9 months. This government has to be given enough of time to do the necessary action, and I think this step has been the boldest step to check the black money. Not only it will bring in a lot of black money, those steps are taking, but I think it will have a very long-term effect on the economy. The price down, the incentive to keep money outside will not be there because, as Shailesh very rightly said, nobody will risk going to jail by having some couple of $1 million.
प्रबल यहाँ पे हिंदुस्तान में बैठ के ये बातें करना ठीक है, लेकिन जब वो मनी पार्क की जाती है हिंदुस्तान के बाहर, और हम जानते हैं कि अंतर्राष्ट्रीय स्तर पर भी इसको लेकर किस तरह की पूरी एक जंग, अमेरिका जाहिर है उसका जो अपना रुतबा है उसके हिसाब से वो कंपनियों को जो है वो पैसा फाइन कर सकता है, लेकिन क्या भारत ऐसा कर सकता है? भारत के पास वो मींस नहीं.
Let me tell you, once the legislation comes into force, you will find all these getting streamlined. What we need to
लेकिन
do...
इंडियन लॉज और इंटरनेशनल लॉज इनके बीच में फर्क तो समझना होगा.
No, फर्क तो है ही. But the question is that once the Indian law gets implemented, then you will find there is a clear disincentive to do anything illegal on the part of the Indians if they have been doing.
What about domestic, Prabal? How do you sense that? Because stipulation of more than 20,000 rupees for immovable will be monitored, but...
In my opinion, 20,000 limit is a little on the lower side. Because in today's scenario...
And how do you monitor?
It can be monitored because everywhere you have to give PAN card number.
Yeah.
And the moment the PAN card number is there...
My question is, I mean, it's a layman's question. For a transaction that's always been under the radar, how does it suddenly come about?
Let me tell you, the government view is like this, and this is the same with my view. If the black money is being generated for less than 20,000, saying we are not going to look into that because the money is too insignificant. But if somebody is doing big time black money which is back to the economy of the country, then it has to be in millions of dollars, or if it in India it has to be in crores of rupees. In crores of rupees you cannot do transactions of 20,000 rupees repeated till the time it becomes 100 crores.
Yeah, it's carrot and stick, right? So on one hand you're saying all these laws, And there's been this experience in South Korea, for example, where you incentivize payments through the equivalent of RuPay. So if you go through a credit card, you get certain amount of discounts or cashbacks and stuff like that. If you see, I think in the budget speech that has been spoken about.
Yeah.
So that model has been a very successful model in certain other countries, where increasingly, see, the only way you can control ultimately black money is if 90% of your transactions, consumption transactions, are happening.
यानी तो दो तरीके हुए ब्लैक मनी को देखते हैं, एक तो भारत में ही कैसे उसको कंट्रोल किया जाए, जिसका जिक्र कर रहे थे गोविंद, और बाकी दूसरे ये है कि अंतर्राष्ट्रीय जो नियम है उनके कायदे कानून के हिसाब से किस तरह से इसको किया जाए। मैन्युफैक्चरिंग का हम जिक्र करते हैं, उसमें खासकर मेक इन इंडिया की बात बार बार सुनाई दी है, उनका खुद का पैट प्रोजेक्ट है पीएम मोदी का। इसमें डिफेंस सेक्टर को लेकर आपकी किस तरह की उम्मीदें हैं, क्योंकि उसमें बार बार ये बताया जा रहा है कि भाई हम ठीक है दूसरे कंट्रीज से डील जरूर कर रहे हैं, लेकिन जो इक्विपमेंट्स हैं हम वो भारत में बनाने की कोशिश करेंगे ताकि इसको इंडिजिनाइज किया जा सके और ज्यादा जॉब क्रिएशन हो। इसमें अनाउंसमेंट किस तरह का नजर आया आपको बजट में?
Announcement. So let me just give you a backdrop as to the importance of Make in India for a country like India. तो इंडिया में अगर आप नया जीडीपी के कैलकुलेशन के हिसाब से ब्रेकअप देखेंगे तो प्राइवेट पर कैपिटा, फॉर एग्जाम्पल द पीएफसी, विच इज फाइनल कंजम्पशन एक्सपेंडिचर प्राइवेट, विच इज द मनी दैट वी स्पेंड, दैट यू एंड आई स्पेंड ऑन द स्ट्रीट्स, 9% ऑफ द ओवरऑल जीडीपी, ह्यूज मनी। और अगर इंडियन suppliers is not able to attend to the demand, then the demand will be catered to by foreign imports. So there will be a significant risk evolving in the current account balance situation or the external debt situation. So keeping that in mind, we definitely need to strengthen the Make in India, the manufacturing sector of the country, who can supply the requirements of the Indian population, because again India is a domestic demand driven economy. So that being the backdrop, the trust that is being given to Make in India, I don't think is sufficient, and it needs to be increased quite a few notches.
टेक्नोलॉजी का पार्ट जो सबसे ज्यादा महत्वपूर्ण है कि किसी भी जो सौदे में सबसे इम्पोर्टेंट जी का खरीदा जाना, वो से आएगी। अगर मेक इन इंडिया भी हम करते हैं, भारत में भी बनाते हैं, और इंडियन कंपनीज को भी अगर हम कहते हैं बनाने के लिए, तो टेक्नोलॉजी कैसे आएगी?
जी, if you go back to the concept of Swadeshi, so did not flourish in India because the quality services that were being produced and the price we were asking for it was not matching. So it was a lose-lose situation for the Indian consumers कि वो खराब चीज ज्यादा कीमत में क्यों खरीदे? So they will definitely go to international or the suppliers. So same is the issue with technology. Look at the various institutions we have which are creating technology-based products in India. Maybe they are good at creating bits and pieces of the technology which are then later on assembled to create a nice looking product with a nice user interface, etc. abroad. But by themselves they are not in a situation to create an end-to-end solution for business.
तो यानी आप ये कह रहे हैं कि कुछ हेल्प बाहर से ली जाएगी और कुछ भारत में बनाया जाएगा, क्योंकि अभी भी जो हम बनाते हैं ज्यादातर असेंबलिंग का काम है जो भारत में होता है।
भारत में बिट्स एंड पीस वाइज काम होता है, और जो असेंबलिंग होता है वो बाहर होता है, एंड देन दे ऐड अ नाइस लुकिंग इंटरफेस ऑन टॉप ऑफ इट, अ जैकेट ऑन टॉप ऑफ इट, जो वो उसको काफी ज्यादा यूजेबल बना देती है।
But how do you, I mean, you're a large manufacturing group again. How do you see the whole Make in India debate as it's progressed till date, which is of course?
You see, unfortunately, manufacturing in India is not growing as the data given by FM himself, that it has come down from 17% of GDP to 16%, which is a really, in my opinion, very, very concerning factor. And why is this? That's because no matter what you do, manufacturing sector creates the maximum employment. And we should give maximum emphasis on creating employment in this country if the economy has to have a demand push, so to say. In my opinion, there are a couple of reasons why the manufacturing is not happening much. First of all, obviously the global demand was actually at a lowest ebb for some time. Europe is almost, there is no demand that is happening. America, although the biggest consuming country, is not importing that much as it used to be. And in the Indian economy as a whole is actually creating all the demand that is happening in manufacturing. All said and done, the reason why the manufacturing growth is not happening, and we are possibly not looking at that, is there is a lot of idle capacity that is still lying in the manufacturing sector, which has not been used up for the last 3, 4, 5 years because there was no global demand and there was no Indian demand. The Indian manufacturers, and very rightly so, would first like to fill up that idle capacity in the country, and then only they will go to invest further to create capacity. In my opinion, I do not see the Indian manufacturing sector growing up once again in less than 1.5 to 2 years. If anything happens before that, I will be pleasantly surprised.
Right.
Otherwise, I see that it is going to take that much
Depot, on
of
the
time.
question perhaps could have covered earlier also. India finally has a place in the world, right? Where do we stand with regard to the external sector? I mean, while we may want to grow as an economy, fortunes also are dependent on factors, some of which have already benefited us, like falling energy prices and commodity prices. But then there's also the problem of lower import demand from many countries, which is affecting our exports.
Yes, see, the entire emerging market concept, especially the BRICS concept, is slowing down. So if you consider Brazil, there is a huge amount of economic slowdown there. There's rising inflation. If you consider China, China is slowing down. If you consider Russia, because of global oil, the slowdown in prices, as well as the clampdown of US because of the war activities Russia is involved in, and even South Africa, where corruption is now. So investors are losing faith on most of the BRICS nations except India. So India is the only ray of hope, according to me, within the BRICS nation, which can propose a good amount return of investment to all these FIIs over the next.
जरूर इस पर जरूर चर्चा करेंगे, दूसरे मेहमानों की राय लेंगे, लेकिन उससे पहले कुछ राजनीतिक प्रतिक्रियाएं हमारे सामने आ रही हैं, उनको सुन लेते हैं.
This is the first time in the history of the country the finance minister giving highest priority to the infrastructure. Our country needs good infrastructure, and the investment in infrastructure increases more employment potential. And for the ports, for the roads, and for the railway, the finance minister give additional budget for us, and this is a great.
हम इस बजट को जो है वो देश की प्रोग्रेस एंड प्रॉस्पेरिटी का गजट के रूप में देखते हैं. ये बजट ही नहीं है, बल्कि देश की समृद्धि और देश के विकास का गजट है. और जिस तरह से देश के गांव, गरीब किसान, झुग्गी झोपड़ी के इंसान, महिला और नौजवान, हर समाज के हर वर्ग को प्रगति की मुख्य धारा में शामिल करने बजट के माध्यम से की गई है.
बहुत बढ़िया बजट, आम इंसान के हित का बजट, और जैसे पेंशनलेस सोसाइटी का एक नया विचार कॉन्सेप्ट रखा है वित्त मंत्री जी ने, और एक और एल्डर सिटीजन्स का ध्यान रखा गया, वहां दूसरी और इस बात का भी ध्यान रखा गया कि देश के 2/3 से अधिक युवाओं की है, उसकी ओर भी ध्यान. काले धन को लेकर के जो नए प्रावधान लाने की घोषणा की गई है, वो भी एक बड़ा ही महत्वपूर्ण निर्णय है, घोषणा है.
करना चाहता हूं माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी का और माननीय वित्त मंत्री जी का, जिन्होंने बहुत ही सकारात्मक सोच को विशेष ध्यान दिया है और बिहार को विशेष पैकेज के समान ही राशि आवंटित किया गया है.
Keeping the fiscal deficit and the revenue deficit under control, which is very crucial to keep the inflation under control, and also a lot of things have been done on the infrastructure, which is lacking in our country. That's very welcome feature, I feel. So overall, we feel that budget is good and positive.
2000. We are privileged and honored to have with us the Minister of Finance, Corporate Affairs and Information and Broadcasting, Shri Arun Jaitley ji, and Minister of State for Finance, Shri Jayant Sinha ji. I extend a warm welcome to you, sirs. We have on the dais Shri Rajiv Maharshi, Finance Secretary, Shri Shaktikanta Das, Revenue Secretary, Shri Ratan P. Wattal, Secretary, Dr. Shri Ratan P. Wattal, Expenditure, Dr. Hasmukh Adhia, Secretary Financial Services, Srimati Aradhana Johri, Secretary Disinvestment, Dr. Arvind Subramanian, Chief Economic Advisor. I extend a warm welcome to you all, sirs and madam. Friends, the Honorable FM will make his opening remarks. After that, we will take a few questions. Friends, the Minister has taken time out of his very busy schedule to be here. We should make the best use of his presence. I request you to please frame your questions in a short and precise manner and restrict the question to one per individual. May I also request you to kindly switch off your mobiles and to keep them on silent mode. Over to the Honorable Minister for his opening remarks.
Well, thank you very much for all being here. Let me at the very outset express my gratitude to all the secretaries, the Chief Economic Advisor, and of course my colleague, the Minister of State, Mr. Jayant Sinha, and also all the officials who worked with them in the last few months, scrutinizing various suggestions which were coming, and then finalizing all the budget proposals. Challenging task. I don't want to repeat what already has been said in the budget statement in the morning, but I can tell you that there's a particular set of circumstances, both very favorable and very challenging at the same time, that we were working under. The first challenge, of course, was that there is a redefined architecture of the fiscal relationship between the center and the states. And obviously the resources, both in absolute terms and percentage terms, available to the center have gone down. We do not regret it. In fact, we are happy that this has happened. It was long overdue. The 14th Finance Commission needs to be complimented for that. And being a government that was committed to cooperative federalism, we have gladly accepted that recommendation. And therefore, a very large part of the central revenue, we calculate it is about 47%. And if you take the national revenue of the center and the states together, it's about 62% that goes to the states. Now this which will be spent on the ground. This also means that states are equal co-partners, and their level of responsibility in enhancing national growth also increases. I'm sure all states will take it in the right spirit and contribute in this task of nation building. So we were first constrained by the fact that the resources had declined. I think the second situation was that the world was enthusiastically looking at us. And when I speak of the world, predominantly both domestic and international investors. And therefore, notwithstanding that constraint, we had to carry on the track on which this government has functioned in the last 9 months. And there are a large number of unfinished tasks that we have to fill up, and we had to walk on a road which we have laid down for ourselves. And that obviously meant working for higher growth rates within limits of fiscal prudence. And therefore, of course, we do anticipate that our growth rates will be reasonably better than what they were this year. We anticipate, as has been pointed out in the economic survey, between 8 and 8.5. We had a choice to make. And the choice was that if we stuck to the pre-established fiscal deficit target of 3.6, which is prior to the 14th Finance Commission, we'd really have to cut down a very large part of the public spending. Neither could we abandon fiscal prudence. So we found the right balance in wanting to reach the 3% target in 3 years instead of 2 years. And we stuck to that road. This will obviously give us, in each of the 3 years, a reasonable amount of flexibility and a resource at our disposal which would predominantly go to public spending. The public spending on infrastructure, which is the first key highlight, we have increased notwithstanding the squeezing of the fiscal space. We've added and decided to explore other avenues of infrastructure long-term spending in terms of tax-free bonds, in terms of a fund being created where center also contributes. Maybe the PSUs may also contribute to that. We'll find funds for that purpose, and the large body of investors also contributes, both from domestically and predominantly internationally. We then had on manufacturing, correcting some of the inverted duty structures and areas where rebate could be given, which were job creating areas. Obviously, the task of the national resource going to the weaker sections and the more vulnerable sections was very important. So we maintained or enhanced the spending as far as those sectors were concerned. We also brought a paradigm shift in the thinking to the extent that you need to introduce ideas of social security within the system. So both for the weaker sections, principles of equity in mind, we have come out with certain ideas. With regard to the eastern region, there was a special place in our policy. And as far as the taxpayers are concerned, we have prioritized what our ideas were. We want more money in the hands of the taxpayer. We wanted to incentivize them to save for their own future. And those savings in turn pushes up the savings rate and are useful for the country as a whole. And those who evade the law, we had a tough message for them. Now, these are amongst the various highlights, and I'm sure this will balance growth, fiscal prudence, equity, as also create confidence in investors. Under the circumstances when our space was to a large extent squeezed, there were certain structural reforms in terms of ideas, in terms of new legislations which we have proposed. These will be in addition to what's already pending in Parliament, and I'm quite sure that the next few sessions of Parliament on economic legislations we'll have our hands full. That's all I had to say. If there are any queries you have to me or to any of my colleagues.
Yeah. Okay, let's start with this gentleman here.
Roadmap. Now you're going to achieve 3% by 2017-18, justifying that you're going to increase the capital spending. But the big elephant in the room is the India. You think they're going to support this idea of yours and support you in enhancing growth by cutting rates anytime?
Well, I think you need to have a little patience. You'll get the answer to your question.
Here, please.
Mr. Jaitley, Smita Sharma from TV Today Network. Given that increasingly there are more states which are ruled by the BJP, would that help you in plugging leakages when you talk of subsidies? How do you, because you're continuing with social spendings, you're continuing with subsidies, how do you really look at plugging in those leakages? And secondly, the one rank, one pension was expected to be implemented. There was a sense that the Ministry of Defense had given to army personnel. There seemed to be no mention of this in your budget.
See, as far as leakages are concerned, it is not a party issue. I don't think there is any political party in India which stands up and says that leakages in subsidies must continue. Therefore, it's not an issue of a BJP government or a non-BJP government. At the moment, oil and diesel having been linked to the market, our next strategy in the subsidies is twofold. We are concentrating on LPG, where the cash transfer system is being implemented. We implement that in toto. And thereafter, I have in the budget today appealed to the more affluent ones to voluntarily relinquish the subsidies because they are not entitled to them. We'll await our success in that direction before we proceed further. And your next question was? Well, as far as I have already in the last budget said that we are going to implement the one rank, one pension. This need not be stated on every occasion. We are completely committed to it. The methodology of calculating that one rank, one pension is an issue pending between the services and the Defence Ministry. As and when that idea is formulated, not only it should be implemented, it will be implemented. And you may only notice that I have today, despite the squeeze, increased the allocation for defence by more than by almost 25,000 crores.
Sir, Venkataraman.
Sir, my question pertaining to Tamil Nadu project, that's a Sedu project. Sedu Samudram project. The previous government allotted more than 4,000 crores for the implementation of the project. Where today's project is value, or you one of your.
Well, whatever proposal we get from the Ministry of Shipping, we'll consider that, and I am sure they would also speak to the state government in this regard.
Sir,
Yeah, please.
Sir Dheeraj from the Economic Times. You in your budget today mentioned about strategic sale in loss-making PSUs. Now, will this be a sort of what happened in the previous NDA regime, and how do you intend to carry this? Because there has been no definitives on this.
Well, the Secretary Disinvestment is here. I've said that so far we've been speaking in terms of disinvestment in some cases. We have an elaborate roadmap in front of us. As far as sales are concerned, first to the idea, wherever we find the possibility existing, we will certainly consider it. I am not stating or defining any particular company at the moment.
मैं प्रशांत हूँ एबीपी न्यूज से। आपने अपने बजट स्पीच में स्वच्छ भारत सेस लगाने की बात कही है। अगर जरूरत पड़ी तो क्या कोई टाइम फ्रेम है?
ये कोई टाइम फ्रेम नहीं है। स्वच्छ भारत अभियान के लिए साधन बजट में से आ रहे हैं, साधन एलोकेट भी किए हैं, और इसलिए हमने एलोकेटेड अमाउंट डाल दिया है। इसके अलावा एक दूसरा संकेत भी बजट में दिया है कि जो सीएसआर स्पेंडिंग होगी उसमें हमने कोई टैक्स ऑप्स भी बजट में मेंशन किए हैं। उसके बाद अगर आवश्यकता हुई तो आज थ्योरेटिकली हमने लिमिट बढ़ाई है, एक्चुअल सेस नहीं लगाया। इट्स ओनली एन एनेबलिंग प्रोविजन। नाउ इफ फंड्स आर रिक्वायर्ड वी यूज द एनेबलिंग प्रोविजन, इफ दे आर नॉट रिक्वायर्ड सो बी इट।
सर, मैं शशांक हूं जैन टीवी से। सर, पूर्व पीएम मनमोहन सिंह ने कहा है कि आम बजट 2015 के इरादे तो अच्छे हैं लेकिन इसको लेकर कोई रोड मैप नहीं है। आम बजट 2015 के इरादे अच्छे हैं लेकिन कोई रोड मैप नहीं है इसका।
धन्यवाद।
सर,
the middle class is concerned about the service tax. Would you like to them, because now the general perception is that they will have to end up paying more services then?
Well, madam, if you consider services is a large part of the Indian economy. In fact, today it's the largest segment of the Indian economy. Now, services are not levied to tax. Agriculture in India tax, so that only leave the entire taxation to manufacturing sector and render it uncompetitive. Therefore, the society runs on tax, is an instrument of social engineering in a society. Therefore, services have to be taxed, otherwise you won't get any services as far as the government is concerned, because the government has no money.
Yeah, that gentleman there. Yeah.
Sir, Arup from Business Standard. Sir, it was pitched as a Make in India budget, and you did speak a lot about improving management prowess. However, what was not there was any incentives for SEZs, including perhaps a reduction in MAT. So could you throw some light upon that, sir?
Well, what is there and what's not there is not there. Because a budget has to balance its figures also.
Yeah, that lady there, please. Yeah.
Arunji, I'm Sheila Bhatt from Rediff.com. I wanted to ask you that this budget was weighted not just in India but many other countries, thinking that this is a this budget will take Modi Sarkar to the next level. So thinking that budget will have really a big bang, great ideas for future and nation building. Why do you think are there any such ideas? Can you?
Well, normally you ask questions, I don't, but I'll ask you. Give me one big idea which is not there.
I'm asking you, sir. Today is
No, that means if you have no idea, it's a question just being asked for the sake of it. Many people have told me.
Do you think that this government will go to the next level because of this budget?
Many people have told me that you must have a big bang idea, and I've asked them to suggest one. So far their response has been what your response is.
Yeah, Cecil.
Sir, Shishir from Hindu Business Line. My question is about, there is a lot of focus on JAM, that's Jan Dhan, Aadhaar and mobile. What is going to happen about PDS, food, fertilizer and kerosene? Are you going to implement direct benefit for these three items?
Well, I think, let me not overreact by answering that question now. Our general approach to subsidies has been stated. Subsidies will remain there, but leakages will not remain. And subsidies are going to be rationalized. If you dissect that paragraph, these are three things you come out of it. Therefore, instead of overstating what is going to happen on a subsequent stage, I have clarified at this stage, we are working on LPG. We are also trying to make sure that as many of the non-deserving entities in that category go out. When it is to be taken to another level, we'll let you know.
Yeah, please.
अरुण जी, आपने वीकर सेक्शन को और इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर पे पब्लिक स्पेंडिंग बढ़ाकर बहुत दोनों को बैलेंस करने की कोशिश की है, लेकिन इस चक्कर में आप मिडिल क्लास को भूल गए हैं. उस मिडिल क्लास में खासा वोट दिया था आपको.
मुझे लगता है कि उन दोनों का कहना है कि कुछ आपने ज्यादा ही मिडिल क्लास के लिए किया है. अब ये सारा जो पूरा में अगर विकास आता, स्वाभाविक लाभ हर वर्ग को होगा, मिडिल क्लास भी उसमें से एक है. और जो पूरा अगर आप चार्ट देख लें तो पिछले साल और इस साल मिलाकर जितने मिडिल क्लास टैक्स पेयर्स को रिलीफ जितना मिला है, मुझे नहीं लगता कि पिछले 68 बजट्स में बैक टू बैक 2 बजट्स ने कभी इतना दिया होगा.
Yeah, please, that gentleman there.
सर, सौरभ इंडिया टीवी से. सर, मिडिल क्लास को एक्सपेक्टेशन थी कि जिस हिसाब से आपने इनकम टैक्स स्लैब में पिछली बार थोड़ी सी रियायत दी थी, इस बार भी होम लोन पे या डायरेक्ट टैक्स पे कुछ ना कुछ.
देखिए, माय अप्रोच हैज बीन, मेरी अप्रोच ये रही है कि मिडिल क्लास की सेविंग्स को इनकरेज किया जाए, उनकी जेब में ज्यादा पैसा जाया जाए, और जिस रोड मैप पे हम चले हैं वो मिडिल क्लास के लिए भी बेहतर है, उनके भविष्य के लिए भी बेहतर है. और ये सेविंग्स पूरी इन्वेस्टमेंट में कन्वर्ट होती है तो देश के लिए भी बेहतर है.
Arun ji, Ravish Tiwari from India Today. You set a target of 8.5 lakh crore for farm credit. There's no dedicated bank for farmers. It's the same commercial financial institutions that extend that credit. I'm wondering why was a need for a dedicated banking institution for traders. Is it BJP's appeasement of its own vote bank?
This is already been farm credit approaches from the banking system for farmers which have been going on. We've expanded the scope of those loans. There is a subvention also in that loans which takes place. As far as this segment of the very small traders are concerned, 5.77 crores in the country, these were completely unfunded categories. And therefore it is for the first time that we thought of them, and that's why I have subtitled it Funding the Unfunded. And that's the approach we've followed with regard to them. You did not create a separate bank for them. We've created a separate which will be leveraging the resources to these sections.
Yeah, that lady there, please. Yeah.
No, PSUs, are you referring to loss-making PSUs?
Well, I am not confining myself to anyone in particular at the moment.
Yeah, Srinjoy. Yes.
Sir, you hinted at income tax cuts for the middle class in the near future. Is that likely in this financial year, or are you looking at the next 3 years for that?
Well, normally fiscal policies are in the budget itself.
Sapna.
Yeah. So, what's the road forward on GST now? One of, some steps the budget has announced also.
Well, the first move will have to be that the empowered committee will have to decide on its chairman. Because the previous chairman is no longer the minister. And he'd done a very good job. I thank him for that. And thereafter, we'll certainly be having a meeting with the empowered committee and trying to pass the constitution amendment in this session of parliament itself. And thereafter, the next round of legislations will have to be drafted in consultation with the...
Sir, just one more question on direct taxes also. You mentioned that...
let your...
sorry, I'm very sorry. Just a couple of seconds, sir. You also indicated on direct taxes that you're trying to kind of streamline direct tax provisions in line with also your indirect tax proposal like GST. Could you throw some light on that? Because it was an important but a passing reference in your budget speech.
No, this reference was to a future roadmap that I have laid down. And a future roadmap that I have laid down is, and this is not for individual assessees. Individual assessees will continue the exemptions because these are exemptions which incentivize savings. And I want to incentivize savings as far as individual assessees are concerned. This was in reference to the of the corporate taxation in India. Now, as I mentioned, we are losing out on both counts. Most Asian economies have a far lower rate. I was told that the ASEAN rate is now 21.9% approximately, which is far lesser than ours. But we are both counts. We are perceived as a high tax economy to investors, but because various forms of exemptions, our actual realization is very low, 23%. And therefore, and this was something which was in the original code also, that can we move towards an area where we gradually bring down the rate to 25 and gradually phase out those of the exemptions which can be phased out. I didn't do it this year because I didn't want to take the whole industry by surprise. So it's better that it's put in, it's informed, and then over the next few years we can work it out.
Rituparna from this side, from CNBC. Congratulations on your first full year. Sir, you have explained the rationale for ending exemption Raj. You have explained why you are also increasing your fiscal deficit target from 3.6 to 3.9 now. So can you give us a sense of how will you take forward your plans on ending exemptions, and won't the increase in fiscal deficit target, won't that squeeze the space for monetary easing, sir?
I just be careful with your terminology, if you don't mind, because we've actually cut the deficit from 4.1 to 3.9. So the deficit has been reduced. It's not been exceeded. So it's relative to a notional target that it's higher than it should have been. But there's been an actual fiscal consolidation in 2015-16 relative to 2014-15. Just a matter of terminology.
Yeah.
You see, by spending less on infrastructure this year, at least the additional part, I could have met 3.6, but that was harmful to growth, so I didn't do it. Now, as far as this phasing out is concerned, you'll hear from us in the...
Mr. Jaitley, a clarification on your reply to the earlier question on disinvestment when someone asked whether it will be loss-making. You said you're not specifying that. Is that a change from your earlier this thing? Because remember your first press conference, you had said that on disinvestment, the policy is more or less on the lines of that of the previous government, which is no strategic sale of profit-making PSUs.
Well, they never ruled out strategic sales.
Of profit-making.
They never ruled out strategic sales, though they never did it. Mm. They never did it whether it was loss or profit.
Are you going to do profit-making ones also?
Well, I am not specifying any company at the moment.
Sir, the money provided for bank recapitalization, is it enough considering the requirements that were talked about?
Banks have been allowed last year, if you remember, to bring down government equity to 52% also, because that's the other source of revenue that they will have.
But are you also looking at bank consolidation in this?
Sir, one question on monetary policy framework. Sir,
Please ask your question. Yeah.
Sir, in the budget speech, you mentioned that you will introduce a bill to amend the RBI Act. When can we expect that bill, and can you share with us the details of proposed new monetary policy committee?
The monetary policy committee will be revealed in the bill, which, as FM said, would come sooner rather than later. In terms of months, there is no time frame, I'm sorry.
Yeah, FM will take last two questions. Yeah, that gentleman there. Yeah.
I have a question here.
सामान्य से सामान्य मानवी को नए उमंग और उत्साह के साथ नई चीजों करने के लिए प्रेरित करने वाला बजट देने के लिए बहुत बधाई देता हूं। देशवासी, मुझे विश्वास है ये बजट आने वाले दिनों में हमें और नई ऊंचाइयों पर ले जाने का एक अवसर प्रदान करेगा।
Depreciation, an additional depreciation over and above what they normally are entitled to.
Okay.
And the reason why these two states have been selected, because you see, the eastern part of the country we've been saying we are going to concentrate on, because that has to be pushed up. There are two other states which have the benefit of a large quantity of coal, so they are going to be benefited in the normal course also.
Sir, Shahid Abbas from Cogences here. Sir, you promised to overhaul government finances and cut corporate taxes in phases, remove business bottlenecks. But your budget does not reveal any overhaul measures, nor unveils any big bang reforms. And also, the statement of tax foregone is also missing this time, which is very...
Okay. Well, the statement of, I have always believed that what was euphemistically referred to as tax foregone was actually tax incentives for growth. Therefore, that booklet has been named accordingly.
Just the last question, please.
Sir, I'm Siddharth from Bloomberg News. Sir, you have talked about in your budget about three important legislations: Indian Financial, talking about Public Debt Management Office, and the third one is on the Monetary Policy Agreement. So these are all three, on these three issues, I believe the Reserve Bank of India has very strong views, and they till date continue to oppose, or they have. So are you not entering into an era of confrontation with the Reserve Bank of India?
Well, the monetary policy framework agreement has been signed by the Governor RBI. So I don't see why you say they are opposed to a monetary policy. They are not. And Public Debt Management Office idea actually emanates from RBI. It doesn't emanate from the government. It's 1999 annual report of RBI. So RBI may have had some second thoughts, but that's a different story altogether. So I don't think they're opposed to Public Debt Management Office, and this decision hasn't been sort of taken in isolation without talking to the RBI.
Thank you, Minister Sir. Friends, please join us on the fourth floor for tea. Thank you. Thanks for participating in this press conference.
This is a budget that appears to have fine words, from clear what kind of devil there is going to be in the implementation details. For example, we hear a lot about infrastructure investment, but the sad truth is that in our country, something like 13% of our GDP is stuck in incomplete infrastructure projects. So unless we actually see concrete implementation, we cannot judge whether this budget is going to deliver results.
There is no timeline with regard to the implementation of the goods and service tax. The finance minister has said that we'll bring it in next year. The direct taxes code has been completely junked and abandoned. This government, which used to talk about tax terrorism when they were in the opposition, there is nothing except a homely on retrospective taxation. Moreover, importantly, there is nothing in this budget for the common man.
वैसा ही ये जेटली साहब का विजन डॉक्यूमेंट है। इसमें कोई गरीबों के लिए किसी प्रोग्राम का ना इंक्रीज है, ना इसमें कोई ज्यादा पैसा दिया गया है। ये सिर्फ कॉर्पोरेट लोगों को खुश करने की बजट, इंडस्ट्रियलिस्ट को राहत देने की बजट, और इसमें जो आगे चुनाव आ रहे हैं उन स्टेट को खुश बजट है, इसके सिवाय और कुछ नहीं।
For the mandate that they got and for the commitment they had done for the reforms that they had said, I must say it is disappointing because much more.
अभी तक तो इस निकली नहीं और देश कैसे बन जाएगा। इस बजट खास करके एग्रीकल्चर के बारे में बहुत सी बातें कही गई, लेकिन वो पहले भी कही जाती थी। सिर्फ यानी हर तरफ पैसा थोड़ा थोड़ा बांट करके ऊँट के मुंह में जीरा डाल दिया। समस्याएं विकट हैं और उसके अनुसार जो बजट एलोकेशन है उसमें कोई दम नहीं मानता।
तो अपने मूल बजट से हटते हुए उन्होंने इस बात का ऐलान किया कि जो भी रीऑर्गेनाइजेशन बिल है उसमें जो प्रोविजन है और जो कमिटमेंट है उसका पालन किया जाएगा। उनकी इस घोषणा का मैं स्वागत करता हूं। इससे ये उम्मीद बंधी है कि जो हम वह तो कम से कम जरूर मिलेगा। तो इसके लिए मैं वित्त मंत्री जी को धन्यवाद देता हूं।
The direct taxes means benefit to those who are direct tax payers or income, and indirect taxes are on all which is passed on to the consumer. So indirect taxes being nearly 3 times higher than the concession given to the direct taxes. That means there is a direct benefit that is being given to the rich, and clearly therefore these budget proposals will lead to the widening of the inequality gap to India's.
नहीं, बजट में किसानों के लिए सुविधा दी नहीं, अल्पसंख्यकों के लिए और नौजवान जो बेरोजगार हैं उनके लिए दी नहीं। क्यों? गरीबी बेरोजगारी से बढ़ती है, गरीबी बेरोजगारी से बढ़ती है, गरीबी से बेरोजगारी नहीं बढ़ती है। अगर बेरोजगारी खत्म हो जाए तो हमारा देश संपन्न हो जाए।
राज्यसभा टीवी पर आप बजट से जुड़ी कवरेज। नमस्कार, मैं हूं अमृता और आज हम इस